Okay, we're live. I'm gonna go ahead and advertise the stream, and we'll get started in 5 minutes. Got almost everything. Let me just got a couple more servers to advertise to. Okay. I've advertised it everywhere, so people want to join, they join. If they don't want to, then it's okay. Just make sure the stream is working properly. Okay, yeah, it's working properly. Just need to make sure. Yeah, we'll get started in 3 minutes. Well, actually, more like 2 minutes. Yeah, this is gonna be a long story time. The script for this story time was 27,000 words long. So this is gonna be pretty long. So I mean, probably gonna be 2-hour stream. So this be the first story time to be above 2 hours long. Might be. It really depends on like how fast I talk, because as I've got the more that I do story time, the better that I get at speaking. And so I think that's why even though, for example, Storytime 22 was 5,000 words longer than Storytime 10, it was still only 20 minutes longer because I've gotten better, even though it really should have been 30 minutes longer. So yeah, I've just gotten better at talking. So alright, about a minute, we'll begin. Yep, in 1 minute we're gonna start story time. I'm gonna begin the story time. So let's go. Let me get my place. Now let's begin. This is a redo of January 8th, 2021. Why was freshman year so great? Storytime 2. We're basically at that time period of the year where school is going back and everyone is preparing for the new school year. My school has already begun school for the freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. Seniors start back in a little over a week, so I have a little bit of time before I start back. So I thought it might be a good idea to redo Storytime 2, since I know there are many rising freshmen that are nervous about going to a new school. I also think it'd be interesting to reflect on my own freshman year now as a senior, just to see how far I've come in 3 years. So therefore, I am redoing this Storytime simply because it's the perfect time to redo it. I'm also redoing it because Storytime 2 is of course my second ever Storytime. It was during the experimental phase of Storytime. So now that I've got a firm grip on making Storytimes, I want to make better and clearer Storytimes. Anyways, let's begin. Even though it was 3 years ago, it felt like yesterday that I was at freshman orientation at my new school. I remember meeting our new teachers and then telling us we're going to do great and we're going to become even better than we already were. And they were right. By the end of freshman year, I managed to improve myself mentally, academically, and as a person in general. Freshman year would pave the way for me to improve myself in sophomore and junior year, and will do the same this upcoming school year. So today, I'm going to discuss my freshman year. I'm Zach, and this is Storytime 30 on August 6, 2021. So like all story times, I'm going to start off with some backstory. So 8th grade was a very difficult school year for me. This is mostly because I struggled with depression from September to March. I was bullied a lot and was overloaded with schoolwork. So of course if you saw Storytime 28, you know that this depression ultimately made me become suicidal in mid-February, and then things got really downhill from there. But depression also made me look at going to a different school from the traditional high school like everyone else. One where I would be away from all the bullies. One that encouraged me to do my best. One that taught me things a little differently than traditional schools. Fortunately, I was lucky. There was an option for me that I could do called early college. It's where you graduate high school with both a high school diploma and an associate's degree in either arts or science. If accepted, I would be knocking off 2 years of college, meaning college will get less expensive. So I applied in February. Lucky for me, I got accepted. I got sent the letter of acceptance in early May. I was thrilled to receive this letter. Life was already incredible, as depression ended in March, but being accepted at early college made life all the more better. And by the way, I'm going for an associate in science. Now, looking back as a senior, I've got to say that this is one of the best things to ever happen to me. The past 3 years at the school have been amazing. Even junior year, which was basically shredded by the coronavirus pandemic, was still a blast. That summer would be shorter though, as early college begins in early August rather than late August or like traditional schools. As a result, it would end right before Memorial Day, unlike traditional schools which ended in the second week of June. But the summer of 2018 was still the best summer ever, outside of Fuge of course, see Storytime 29. I basically relaxed all summer and got prepared to begin the new school year, and I needed to prepare, as this would be a school year like no other. And then we reach August 6, 2018, so this is when we had freshman orientation. They basically introduced us to our new teachers as well as tour around the school. We also got a few things we need for the school year, including a t-shirt, our schedule, and our Chromebook. Now, before I begin the school year, I want to give a little bit of information regarding the school. So this school is very small. Only 55 students get admitted each year. It would be raised to 65 starting in the 2019 to 2020 school year, and has stayed that way since. Students can choose to go back to their traditional school at the end of freshman and sophomore year. I of course chose to stay at early college for all of high school since I absolutely love it. We also began the school later than traditional schools. Traditional schools begin their day at 7:45 and ended at 3:15. For us, we went from 8:30 to 3:45. Definitely better timing in my opinion, as I am not a morning person, although it was a little bit problematic for arrival and dismissal since my sister was in the 6th grade during the school year, and she went to the intermediate school I went to. So what happened was that my grandmother took me and my sister to her school at 7:45, then she would drop me off at the high school I would have gone to had I not gone to early college. Here, a bus would take me to my school. I would then take this bus back to the traditional high school, where mom would pick me up. In sophomore year, this would be less complicated when I got my driver's permit, but I was only 14 years old throughout this entire story time, so I wasn't there yet. Now about the school itself, it is shaped in a square. You can run through the hallways in just under a minute. One side has no rooms. One has the lunchroom as well as a few locker rooms. Or not locker rooms, lockers. I don't know why I said rooms. It's not even on my script. Another has the sophomore and junior hallway, and then the last side is the freshman hallway, as well as the front office. I should go ahead and mention that the freshman hallway is the side perpendicular to the lunchroom hallway. Just want to make that clear. Also, at our school, we call the lunchroom the multi-purpose room because we use this room for a variety of things, not just for lunch. So I'll refer to it as the multi-purpose room. Finally, one last detail about the school I want to get straight before moving on to the first day is what makes this school different from traditional high schools. So this is an expeditionary learning school. This means that we do things hands-on. We of course have lectures and tests and that stuff, but we don't do that as much. We're more project-focused. That's why in Storytime 17, I had like 20 projects to talk about for high school, and I probably could talk about even more now, as we had quite a lot of projects from the time that Storytime was released to the end of junior year, so I might end up redoing that Storytime in the future. Anyways, as an expeditionary learning school, we do a thing called intensives. These are where we go out and do an activity to learn or something from the expeditionary learning curriculum. These could be either at school or we could take field trips to these intensives. Oftentimes, we might do multiple activities for an intensive, as we'll see later on. Freshmen do 3 intensives, including a 4th kind of intensive, but not really an intensive thing. I'll explain each intensive as we do in the story time to help you get a better idea of what exactly they are. But all these intensives tasks had a goal of answering a certain question, which each grade has a certain question. The question for freshman intensives was, who am I? By the way, sophomores do 2 intensives as well as a mini intensive, and then juniors do 2 intensives. Seniors do not do intensives, meaning I completed every intensive my school offers, except the second main intensive for sophomore year, but that's because of coronavirus, so that don't count. And then that brings me to my first day of high school, being Tuesday, August 7th. So I really don't remember much about this day. I do remember it being pretty uneventful for a first day. So how about we talk about my high school classes? I will not discuss college just yet because college didn't begin until August 16th. So my first class was English. So I remember this class really well, mainly due to the teacher. This teacher was one of the most influential teachers I've ever had. If you've seen previous story times, you know that I speak very highly of this teacher. But this was not always the case. We at one time were basically mortal enemies. We got into a lot of fights. There's even going to be a situation that happens in November that really exclaims the situation, but more on that later. Now, why did I have these fights with her? Well, I think a lot of it had to do with cockiness. I was one of those students who did the bare minimum and didn't try. I'm a pretty smart dude. I don't have to put a lot of effort to get a good grade. My teacher, of course, tried to get me to do better and stuff, but I refused and continued to do jack shit. So that's where it really began. English would last from 8:30 to 9:45. After English came study hall. Now, normally, most students would have world history during this period, but I, as well as 20 of us, already took world history in 8th grade, so we instead went to a different class that had an online college class in place of world history. I'll discuss later on. One thing I want to mention is the teacher who looked over us. So me and this teacher at first had some issues, just like my English teacher. It's mostly because instead of doing my work, I do other stuff. He got pretty frustrated with this, but one day he'd asked about my grade, since he predicted I had like a D in the class. I had a 95 in the class. Since then, we've been really cool. I had him for American history in 11th grade, and he was awesome. This is of course the same teacher that refers to me as Brother Baynard, and has those really funny voice cracks from Storytime 22. Study hall lasted from 9:45 to 11 o'clock, although my teacher had a habit of releasing us at like 10:55 to go to lunch early. After study hall came lunch. So lunch right now was strange. I sat with the crowd, but I didn't talk to anyone. The reason was because I hadn't made any friends yet, but the school will help in a couple days. Lunch lasted from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock for now, but when college started, it would last from 11 to 11:30. Then came geometry. So I took Algebra 1 in 8th grade. It was really difficult and made me lose my sanity, but I still passed it, so I of course took geometry in 9th grade. Then in the second semester I would take Algebra 2, meaning I finished all of my high school math requirements in freshman year. Anyways, geometry was fun. I don't remember too much about the class itself, but I do remember the teacher very well. He was a very wise person. Oftentimes he used sayings and other stuff to back up points, which I always admired. He was overall a really cool teacher. He retired a little over a year ago, so yeah, I miss him. Geometry lasted from 12 o'clock to 1:15. After that comes seminar, my final high school course of the day. So seminar was a class that basically helped us with other courses. It also was our class that was affiliated with intensives. Each day would be dedicated to a certain day. Mondays were dedicated to English, Tuesdays were dedicated to college as well as sometimes intensives, Wednesdays were for world history, or study hall in my case, Thursdays were for math, and then Friday was a free day. Seminar with my geometry teacher, so I conveniently didn't have to move after geometry. It lasted from 1:15 to 2:30. College had not started just yet, so 2:30 was when school ended. Of course, at 2:30, I would take a bus back to the traditional school, where Mom picked me up. I also want to mention that this week was, for the most part, just us freshmen and juniors. The first day, we had sophomores, but then the next day, until Friday, they were on a 3-day intensive. And then seniors don't start back until college begins. That's why this year is going to start a little. That's why this year for me is starting a little bit later, in case you're wondering. Funnily enough, the next week would be just us freshmen and sophomores, as the juniors were also on a 3-day trip for an intensive. So then that brings me to the next day, being August 8th. So this day was a little bit different than day 1, as we were going to begin our first ever intensive. Pretty exciting. This intensive would last this day, the next day, and Friday. So what was this intensive about? Well, it was about introducing us freshmen to each other as well as the school, basically just trying to get us to know each other and make friends. I think my school does an amazing job with this intensive every year, as I've always noticed that the freshmen are super awkward and quiet the first week, and then they're laughing and talking with each other the second. And of course, this is the case with my grade. I wasn't the only quiet and shy kid. Most of us were. Of course, we might have had some friends we went to middle school with, but for me, that really wasn't the case. So I was pretty quiet alongside most others. This wouldn't be when that changed, but that moment is coming up. You know, it's pretty weird to think that at one time, I was not comfortable with those in my grade, because now we're all friends with each other. Of course, some of us are more comfortable with others, but we all still know each other very well. Pretty sad that I'm going to be saying goodbye to everyone this December, and I'm really going to miss them all. So back to the intensive. What in the hell did we do? Well, we toured a local college about maybe 5 to 10 minutes away. This is a private school, by the way, so if I was to mention the name of this college, y'all probably wouldn't recognize it unless, of course, you know me in real life. In that case, you're either my dad, my teachers, or my friends, so yeah, then you know it. Anyways, I don't remember too much from this trip. However, I do remember one thing that happened that, while embarrassing for me to talk about, it's going to be really funny for y'all. So I might as well talk about it. So remember those at orientation we were given t-shirts. So apparently we were supposed to wear those t-shirts on the intensive. I don't know. Well, on intensives we're supposed to wear them. I didn't know this, and as a result, I didn't wear my t-shirt, so that was a little bit awkward. A few others didn't wear their t-shirts either, so I wasn't alone, but still weird. Everyone was wearing a light blue t-shirt with our school logo, and then there's me wearing a red shirt. My English teacher still gives me a hard time about this today. Oh well, I at least made it up that Friday. So I believe we actually got back at 2:30, as I don't remember having any classes that day, so that's all we did that day. Then comes the next day, being Thursday, August 9th, so I completely forgot about this day in Storytime too. But like I explained last Storytime, the unique part about writing is the more I write, the more I remember. I've also talked to others as well, which is why I remember what we did on this day. So I believe we did normal classes through lunch. After lunch, it was time for intensives. So this activity was supposed to help us build friendships through the sacred practice of teamwork. By the way, we did this with our third block, so I did this with my geometry teacher. Anyways, I believe we were split into groups of 5. If I'm not mistaken, I believe I was with 3 girls as well as another dude. Our goal was with some paper, tape, string, and popsicle sticks. We had to drop an egg from a height. So most groups did a parachute style design. Me and my group must have misinterpreted the instructions, as we thought we had to drop the egg on a platform. So that's what happened. As a result, our egg of course cracked when we dropped ours, as we had to drop the platform with it. But at least we learned from it, and we learned more about each other, so it's all good. I also want to mention that we finished a little early, so we went back to our first block for whatever reason. Our English teacher then takes us outside. We were going to pick up trash around the campus. We were of course given gloves. I believe we each got 30 minutes of volunteer hours, but I remember in one case I found a golf ball, so instead of throwing it away, I decided to put it in my pocket. I was with this one girl when I picked it up. She then says, "Why are you keeping that golf ball? You never know if someone put it up their ass." Her, me, and everyone else around us started laughing. I mean, true, she's got a point. By the way, the way she said it, that was pretty funny. I think I still kept the ball, although I washed it afterwards. Now we move on to Friday, August 10th. So this was one of the best days of my life. Just such a fun but super productive day. This would be the day where I went from being pretty shy to being a part of the group at school and establishing some friends. So this part of the intensive involved us going to a little city called Lenore. It's about an hour northwest of Charlotte, with the city I live in. Anyways, there was a little park up at Lenore that had a place to rock climb, so as you can expect, we did rock climbing. This is of course meant for us to come closer as a grade and just to make friends. This is by far the most effective part of the intensive. So before I begin discussing the rock climbing itself, I first want to mention the bus ride up there. So we were given assigned seats. Normally, assigned seats are a bad thing. If you saw Storytime 28, then you know assigned seats or certain required spots drove me into a very nasty situation. But in this case, they were a good thing because we didn't know anyone, so having us sit with someone else gave us the opportunity to make new friends. And that would prove to be the case here. In fact, I would go on to make a total of 4 friends on this day alone. The first friend I made was on the bus ride up there. This is the kid I was assigned to sit with. His name was Michael. Michael went to a different middle school than me. At first, we actually didn't have much in common, but that would change on the bus. So after 15 minutes into the ride, I whipped out my phone and played some Clash Royale. He then sees me on my phone and asked what I'm playing. I then talked about Clash Royale and introduced him to the game. Then the conversation escalated into things outside Clash Royale. I learned that he played football in middle school. I think he played defense. Anyways, he was overall a really nice kid, unlike other football players. 8th grade. Also want to talk I also got to talk about myself a little. I didn't really talk about 8th grade, since that's probably the last thing I will ever talk to someone about someone I first meet. But I did talk about what I did that summer. I talked about traveling a lot. He was pretty interested in me, which definitely made me feel comfortable around him. Whenever someone is genuinely interested in me as a person and what I do, that's when I begin to feel comfortable around them. So that's why me and Michael became friends basically instantly. By the way I know when someone is interested in me is when they ask me questions and listen to me. That's what Michael did, so that made me feel really comfortable around him. Unfortunately, Michael would go back to traditional school after freshman year. He felt like early college was too difficult, which I completely understand. He also wanted to play football too, which I also understand. I haven't heard from him since freshman year, but I do wish him the best. Then we arrived at the rock climbing place. So we did 2 activities while up here. The glaring activity was of course rock climbing, but the other one was team building exercises. So our teacher split us into 2 groups. One group did the rock climbing first, and the other did the team building exercises first. I was with the group that did the rock climbing first. However, Michael was with the group that did the team building exercises first. So this meant that I was going back to being shy while waiting to go rock climbing. But fortunately, that's when I met my second friend. So this is a kid named Lucas. Now, me and Lucas went to the same middle school. However, I had completely different classes than him, so we never got to meet. But now, while I didn't have any classes with him, which is the same case with Michael actually, I would still get the chance to talk to him every morning before classes began. I also would eventually have most of my classes with him in junior year, and the same would be true for senior year. So anyways, Lucas is a pretty cool dude. He really likes memes, which I also like. Which, I mean, is pretty glaring when all I do on Instagram is post them. So of course I like memes. Anyways, Lucas liked memes too. So that's kind of what we started talking about. He also liked history, which I of course like too. But I'm not sure how we started talking, though. He might have seen me watch a meme or something. I don't know. But all that matters is that we became friends. We're still friends today. And then it was my turn to rock climb. So there were 3 different difficulties we could choose from. There was a beginner difficulty, an intermediate difficulty, and an expert difficulty. I didn't know this, so it just so happens that with my luck that I go to the expert difficulty. I had never rock climbed before this, so you bet that I was pretty much flailing over the rocks trying to get to one after another, and that's kind of what happened. My English teacher sees this and then asks a really tall kid to come help me. So this really tall kid would be the 3rd friend I made that day. His name was Dylan. He was also super nice, so he came over to help me. He helped me get onto the second later, but after that I couldn't do much. But for a beginner getting to the second later, that was pretty impressive, so he of course congratulated me on getting that far. Anyways, while this situation of course happened, me and Dylan didn't immediately become friends. It would take a few weeks before that happened, but this is kind of where it started. Anyways, as time progressed, we'd become better friends. Now me and Dylan are very close. Anyways, we both share pretty much the same interests. We're both big on Clash of Clans, Pokemon, Minecraft, and other games. Dylan's also really smart. He's going to be our grades valedictorian. He's also an Eagle Scout. I believe he actually got promoted to Eagle Scouts that summer, so he got to talk about that. After we went rock climbing, we did the team building exercises. I remember spending a lot of time just messing around with Lucas, but somehow I still remember one of the activities we did. This was where we were all standing on a tarp. We had to turn the tarp while over while still standing on the tarp. I believe what happened was that one girl took the role as a leader. She of course came up with the idea, and then we all followed. Her idea involved us moving the tarp and then jumping onto the other side when it came over. It worked exactly how we thought it would work. We did this exercise pretty easily. And then after that, we got the buses loaded and headed over to Golden Corral. So I don't remember all that I ate, but I do remember the thing Michael did. So Michael stole 2 gummy bears and brought them back on the bus. While on the bus, Michael swapped the heads of the gummy bears. It was pretty funny. Speaking of, I also want to mention everyone on the way back. So almost everyone on the bus fell asleep. Like, the only people who were awake were me, Michael, the bus driver, and the teachers. I can't blame them though, as it was a very long day, and it was like 100 degrees too, so it makes sense. But still pretty funny how while everyone was asleep, there was me and Michael who just didn't give a shit and stayed up the whole bus ride. And then we arrived back at school. So this would be where I met my 4th friend. So this friend was the girl whose locker was above mine. I think we might have talked a little bit before the trip, but I don't really remember. But I do remember telling her some joke while at my locker and her laughing pretty hard over it. She then repeated that joke to her friend in Spanish. Her name's Gabby, by the way. She was from Puerto Rico. That's why she repeated the joke in Spanish. While I haven't talked to her in a while since COVID really messed everything up, we're still pretty good friends. And then that day is finished. That means that we are finished with the first intensive. Pretty strange that it's about to be 3 years since this whole intensive happened, but yeah, it's a nice way of introducing us to each other as well as the school in general. I also want to mention that I actually reached out and asked many others in my grade about their experience rock climbing. From what I can gather, it seems like everyone made an average of 2 friends on this trip. That's really good. Of course, we all made 2 friends, which would lead to us, well, most of us made 2 friends, which will lead to all of us being friends one day. God, I love everyone at school. It's really sad that I'm leaving them. So then that brings me to the next day. I more specifically want to mention Thursday, August 16th. So this was the first day of college. This meant that now, school ended at 3:45. On Monday through Thursday, I would have college from 2:30 to 3:45. So let's talk about my first college course. So this was PE. Now PE in middle school is awful. However, high school would be way better. It was only the first semester of 9th grade, and my professor wasn't a dick like my PE teachers in middle school were. So what did we do? We spent a bunch of time playing outside. The college had a track as well as a field, so we basically got to run and walk around it. We also could play football or soccer. Just as long as we were doing something, we made 100. I made 100 in this course since I generally spent all my time walking while talking with Michael. Then for Friday, August 17th, the reason I bring this day up is because now Friday was going to work differently than other days. Instead of doing college at the end of the day, we would have college in the morning for 2.5 hours. This meant that I had 2 college courses on Friday. My first one was Introduction to Computers. I'll refer to it as computers for the sake of time. This class is also our Monday and Wednesday class, by the way. I remember this class as being pretty challenging. I think that freshmen should take this class in the second semester due to its difficulty, but I don't really make the rules, so oh well. Introduction to Computers lasted from 9 o'clock to 10:15, and then from 10:15 to 11:30, I took a class called Academic Support. So Academic Support was basically a class that taught us how to be successful in college and how to study and that stuff. So it makes perfect sense why we took it as one of the first courses. This course was only on Fridays, by the way. Now I still have one last course I need to talk about, but I won't talk about it until August 29th. This is the college class we had in place of world history. It was an online course. So then as a result, we only had 40-minute high school classes on Fridays. Well, I actually am not sure how long they lasted, but I do remember from 2:30 to 3:45, we did clubs. So everyone got to sign up for a club during this time. My club was Quiz Bowl. This was where we were split into 2 teams. We didn't try to score points by answering questions ranging from topics of basically anything. Like one question could be asking us about President William Howard Taft getting stuck in the bathtub. And then the next question could be about trigonometry, and then the next one would be about PewDiePie. Of course, the team who answered the question first won the point, and the team who earned the most points won. I believe this club included me and 2 other freshmen, maybe like 4 sophomores, 6 juniors, and 2 seniors. Now, Fridays were a little bit longer than most days, as they lasted from 4 o'clock until 4 o'clock. The reason is because from 3:45 to 4, our school does a thing called closing circle. This is where we gather the entire school into a circle. Of course, the teachers are in the center. The teacher would state any announcement they wanted to make. We would do student announcements, where if a student had an announcement for like their club or something, they would announce it to the entire school. Then the teachers would announce birthdays. I've never had my birthday announced since my birthday is in June, which is a good thing. And then we'd end it off with the spirit read, where a teacher or student would read a quote, and then we head back home. So that was my first week of college. So then that brings me to the next week. Let's talk about Monday, August 20th. So this is the first day of a thing our school we did called crew. It's based on our school's motto. We are crew, not passengers. This motto means that we all are a team and we work together. We don't sit back. So the way our school sponsors this motto is by having us do a class called Crew. I did an entire Storytime on Crew way back in the day. That was Storytime 11. The most important thing I mentioned in that Storytime is that students come in not knowing what Crew is, but they come out not knowing what Crew is. Basically, nobody knows what Crew is. Not even me or the teachers know what Crew is. But as I explain in Crew more, you'll get a better understanding of all it takes. So crew lasted from 11:30 to 12 on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then 8:30 to 9 on Fridays. This meant that from now on, I would only have 30-minute lunches on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, our school does a thing called Smart Lunch, where you can go and get help in any classes that you're struggling with or make up assignments or work or projects. I did occasionally participate in Smart Lunch, but it was uncommon. I regret this now, since freshman year, as we're going to see, was pretty challenging. But as a freshman, I was just a super resistant and stubborn person. I refused to get better until the end of the school year, which really hurt me my freshman year. I would probably be even farther now had I not been such a dumbass. Anyways, back to Crew. The first day of Crew went pretty well. We could have had any teacher for Crew, by the way. My Crew teacher was my English teacher. You know, the one I got in the fights with. We basically just introduced ourselves, and then my English teacher talked about Crew, which is, of course, she didn't do a good job of explaining since nobody knows what Crew is. In Crew, we used a Crew booklet that had all the assignments outlined. I don't remember too much about this book, since I think I threw it away sometime after freshman year. We didn't use a booklet in sophomore year, and we only had Crew for like a month in junior year. Once again, if you're confused, then it's okay. I'll explain everything we do in Crew to help you get an understanding of exactly what we did in Crew. So then I want to jump to that Thursday, August 23rd. So this is kind of a similar situation to the whole t-shirt situation. It's pretty embarrassing for me to talk about, but I know that's going to be pretty funny for y'all, so I'm going to talk about it. So Thursday, I was eating with Michael and Lucas as well as a few other friends I made in between those events. After I got done eating, I went to throw away my trash. That's when I accidentally threw away my phone. But the worst part about it was that I had not even known until about 5 minutes later when I tried to get my phone out to show Lucas and me. I realized that it was not in my pocket, so whenever the trash can where I thought it was, I searched through the trash can. The lunch ladies gave me a pair of plastic gloves beforehand, by the way. They also helped me try to find it. We had no luck, so I quite literally threw away my phone. So yeah, I was without a phone until that December. I still had my really old iPod I used to record my first videos on YouTube with, and I still actually have that iPod today. So that's what I used until Christmas. But still, I didn't have my phone anymore. My friends still laugh at me for this situation today, which I kind of laugh with them. I'm much more cautious about my personal belongings now than I was as a freshman. Like now, anywhere I go, I make sure my phone and my wallet are in my pocket. Every year at our school, each freshman does something stupid at least once. It's just a freshman thing to do. I'll talk about some of the stupid things my friends did as well. For me, that would only be one of 2 stupid things I did that week. Yeah, I did 2 stupid things in just 1 week. And the week before, obviously, forgot my t-shirt, so that's another stupid thing. I'd go on to do more stupid stuff as a freshman than I can even count. I'll refer to these as freshman moments. In fact, I might even make a story time one day just talking about freshman moments. Of course, I'll also talk about freshman moments outside of freshman year in that story time. So I did also do some stupid stuff before freshman year as well as after. In fact, I'm kind of having a freshman moment right now making the story time as we speak. But I think that'll be a fun story time. By the way, anyone can have a freshman moment, as we'll see teachers and other people having freshman moments later on in the story time. So how about we move on to the second stupid thing I did. So this was an introduction to computers. Introduction to computers was a hybrid class. We had a professor who might occasionally teach, but most of the time we went in there and do our work. The professor really didn't do anything but tell the class to shut the hell up and do their work. Anyways, we had 5 assignments total for the first module. 1 was a discussion board, 1 was a test, and the other 3 were assignments off of a program. I knew that the program existed, but I didn't know it had assignments, so as a result, I didn't do them. Because of this, my grade literally was sitting at a 23 after 1 week. Seems like many others were similar to me. Like, I legit had the average grade the first week, so pretty humorous situation. This resulted in the next week, the college advisor talking to almost everyone about their grade. She of course talked to me about it. I told her I didn't know it existed. Her advice was to ask the professor to let me redo it. I did, and the professor wouldn't let me or the rest of the class redo it. I do remember this professor as not being a very good professor. I mean, she barely even taught the class. It's not a good professor, although to some extent it was her fault for not telling us the class that we had to do it. It was mostly my fault, which is why I consider this to be a freshman moment on my part. So then that brings me to near the end of August, more specifically August 29th. So this is when online classes began. This meant that now I would no longer have a study hall, although I'll still refer to this class as study hall because that's what I've done so far in the story time. So what college courses was I taking? Well, I was taking a little course called Community Health. Overall, a very forgettable course. It was mostly just do discussion boards, do the book questions, and do the quizzes. We didn't have a final exam with it, but we did have a research paper we did in November. I'll talk about it since it was pretty important, but the rest of the class wasn't all that important. So then finally, we are in September, had a lot of explaining to do regarding my school and all, but now that y'all know it, the rest of the story time is going to fly by. Anyways, to start, I want to discuss what we were doing in English during this time. So we had just finished reading To Kill a Mockingbird. By the way, we read 4 novels in English. For each novel, we had to do a project. It was a novel per 9 weeks, by the way. So this project was a class project. We had to act out Tom Robinson's trial. If you've never read To Kill a Mockingbird, which you should, it's a great book. Basically, Tom Robinson is a black man who gets falsely accused of rape. We acted out the play on September 27th. Now, this play went just as you'd expect it to. It went pretty horribly. Having 20 freshmen act out a court case that references sex and uses a couple racial slurs, although the racial slurs were of course marked out with different words, but in the book it had a few of those. But this probably wasn't the greatest idea. But we were mature freshmen. We didn't laugh at those parts. But after the play was over, we all cringed so badly. The main reason was me. So I was the witness for the plaintiff. And this would be when I had another freshman moment. So one thing I didn't know beforehand was that we read off our script while doing this play. As a result, I tried to memorize my lines. I'm good at memorizing, but I am no actor. So whenever the defense attorney asked me questions, I would give similar stuff to what the script said, but not exactly. This confused our defense attorney. It also made me look like a dumbass. But I mean, it's freshman year. I did shit like this all the time, as we're going to see throughout the story time. Oh my god, my throat hurts. But it wasn't just my fault why this play sucked. By the way, we didn't do this in front of the audience. We did it in front of a camera, which might sound even worse, but the recording hasn't survived, so it no longer exists, thank God. One reason this play was a failure was because of character selection. Guess who played Tom Robinson? Dylan. Dylan's white, so it was a little weird. It's ironic because the defense attorney, which would be Atticus, was played by a black girl, and Gabby, who is Hispanic, played the girl that falsely accused Robinson. So overall, this play was so bad. So technically, we all had a freshman moment that day. Also, Dylan asked me to include this quote that he said at least 20 times in that play. She was mistaken in her mind. That's 20 extra freshman moments for Dylan on top of reading off the script and not being black. Our school's technology guy recorded the play, by the way, but he too had a freshman moment as well. In the middle of recording, he accidentally stopped the video, so we had to redo it. Then the iPad died. It was pretty funny. By the way, that's why there's no surviving video of this play. So how about a little intermission? So outside of school, I swam competitively, but during this time, I started to feel demotivated to swim. It just got really redundant every practice. It also didn't help that my coach was a dick. Now, the reason I mention this is because the more my motivation for swimming depleted, the lower my grades got and the more irritable I got. As a result, this would be where I started to see a decline in my mental health for the first time since March. Remember, I was still in the post-depression period part 1 during this time, so I was still happier than I ever was. And I was still motivated to swim, just that my motivation was depleting. This situation would get pretty crazy later on. Before I move on to October, I want to mention crew. So this would be where we did our first crew project, being the crew flag. So me and the other freshmen really didn't do much in crew, which is kind of expected because freshmen don't know what's going on. Generally, the sophomores and juniors do most of the work because they know how to do it. So I didn't do much. Kind of defeats the purpose of crew. But I do remember on this flag that we each cut out and decorated a spaceship. The spaceship had our names, of course. Then in the center was the moon. On the moon, it had the words, "Find your true north," engraved. This is kind of our crew's motto. It basically means to find your goal and strive for it. It's been my English teacher's crew motto for God knows how long. But what I remember most about this project was that each crew at Closing Circle one day had to present their flag. We had a couple crew members explain our flag. I was actually one of them. I believe I mentioned the spaceships mentioned that they represented each crew member. It was successful and surprisingly went very well. I also want to mention a friend I made in crew. So this is a guy named Hunter. He was a junior. I don't remember much about him since the last time I saw him was March 2020. But from what I remember, he really liked to do fake punches. Wherever he saw me, he would fake punch me, which is always pretty funny. I sucked at not flinching though, so it made it even funnier. But overall, a really cool dude. Crazy because it felt like yesterday we were in crew together. Now he's somewhere I don't know, and I'm about to begin senior year, so pretty crazy how time flies. So then how about we move on to October? October had a lot going for it, so let's get right into it. To start, I want to mention our next intensive. So now the first intensive back in August was just getting us to fit in and make new friends. This intensive, however, was actually about answering the question, who am I? It took place on August 3rd. So this was kind of like our first real intensive, if that's what you want to call it. So we were split between each of our 3 teachers. I was with my geometry teacher for this intensive. So in here, it was about maybe 20 of us. So we were split into 5 groups of 4. Each group had a large laminated poster paper. These were used by all grades for intensives, except junior year when coronavirus was dominating the world. But anyways, this paper had 3 boxes, each drawn inside each other. I refer to this as a box chart. Our teacher then presented the picture on smartboard. This is called a mystery piece, by the way. If you watch Storytime 22, we had a mystery piece for every lesson in American history. This is kind of the origin of those mystery pieces, as our American history teacher just really liked this, so he incorporated it into his lessons. So with the mystery piece, we had to write down some notices and wonders on the outside of the boxes. We of course then shared with the class. Then we were presented with a reading. This reading was what our school calls the common text. We had to write down some notices and wonders for the space in between the largest and the middle box. After that, we were presented with some more documents. These are called expert files. They had information on more specific details about what we were going to talk about. We of course jotted down our notices and wonders. Now, all we had left was the small box. We had to guess what we'd be doing for that intensive. I don't remember what me and my group wrote, but we probably wrote something that was way off to what we were actually going to do. Our teacher had then announced that what we were going to do. We were going to be talking about the history of our county, more specifically the city. More specifically, we're going to be taking a tour around the historic downtown part of the city. Maybe not the greatest idea since this is a really dangerous part of the city, but we're with the teachers at all times, so it's okay. By the way, I'm not going to discuss any of these things in details, mostly because I don't remember them, but I also won't detail them due to privacy reasons. I also want to mention that for each place we explored, we had to jot down notes. We had a booklet which included every place, so for each place we jotted down the notes. We would use these notes for a future assignment I'll discuss. So then we settled on out. On the bus ride, I sat with Dylan. Our first place was to go to the city park. We had 2 historical sites to see here. One was the carousel. We didn't get to ride it, by the way. Afterwards, we went over to the miniature train. We didn't ride it either, but we did get to sit in it. I remember me and Dylan had to squeeze in just for the both of us to fit in. I mean, this thing was built for 8-year-olds. Both me and Dylan were 14 at the time, so we of course had a hard time fitting in. But we did it. And then we went to the main downtown area. Here we split into 3 groups. I believe I was with my English teacher. So what we did is that we went to inside of this one theater. This theater was built by this one folk musician in the 1940s. Here they basically play different plays and also host the musicians. A lot of big names actually once played at this theater. Like I believe Elvis Presley once performed here. And I think sometime in the 90s, Whitney Houston would go on to perform. Yeah, pretty crazy to think that people like them once visited this city of like 20,000 people. And by the way, I'm not talking about Charlotte. I mean, I'm talking about like the specific city my school is located in. Then we toured different historical houses. The houses were pretty large. Most of them were built in the 19th to 20th century. I don't think any of them had anybody living in them. But if there was and they saw us, that would have been really awkward. Just imagine you're in your house, just chilling. And then you look out the window and see a woman with like 20 students talking about your house. If that was me, I probably would have locked doors and got my gun. After all, this is a very dangerous part of the city, so it wouldn't be too surprising if she was actually a gang leader whose gang members consisted of a bunch of teens and are trying to rob you. But thankfully, we didn't have any altercations with any homeowners, so we were all good. Then we toured this one place that was a museum dedicated to this famous banjo player. The best part about this place, though, is that there was a bunch of banjos we were allowed to touch and play. So being a bunch of freshmen, that's what we did. Our English teacher actually joined us too. Nobody knew how to play the banjo, so we all sounded like ass, but it was still pretty cool. Still baffles me they still put this museum in the middle of the most dangerous part of the city. But, oh well, no banjos were stolen, so all good. Then we toured another theater. We couldn't go inside it, but all I remember is that during the whole civil rights movement, it segregated blacks and whites. The other theater did not segregate, by the way. Then we ate lunch. We basically were all given a hot dog, a bag of chips, and a soda. We sat under this one place in downtown that was kind of built for this purpose. We ate and then did a bunch of other stupid stuff. Afterwards, we went back to the buses. However, the teachers were having to do something, so it was just me and all the other boys in the bus. It was really hot too, so we were all having to deal with the heat. This would be the moment where I would have another freshman moment. I proceeded to shout that if we had to deal with this heat any longer, then we would have to drink our own cum. Of course, the whole school bus started laughing, which is what you do when someone has a freshman moment. The teachers never heard it, since they were off doing somewhere. Then finally we arrived back at school. We weren't done yet, we still had to do college. For me that was computers since it was a Wednesday, so I did that. Afterwards, it was time to leave. So yeah, pretty eventful day. So that brings me to that Friday, October 5th. The reason I bring this day up is because it was a little different than most other Fridays. Instead of shortening high school classes after college and lunch, we didn't have high school classes. Instead, we went straight to crew. The reason was because we were going to do something a little special for crew. It actually started out similar to intensives, where we toured around the school and jotted down notices and wonders, just without the box chart. This stuff included old projects, old yearbooks, and just old pictures. Afterwards, we went back to our crew rooms and talked about it. Then we gathered alongside the rest of the school and headed to the other side of the college campus. The reason we did this is because we were actually going to the old early college building. So the early college building we used in 2018, as well as the one we use now, was not the 2018 is the one we use now. It was not the original early college building. I believe my school started using it in 2012. But before that, they were actually within the college my school is located in. They used it from the time the school was founded in 2008 to 2012. It was a really compact place. Like, we were all crammed, but it still was cool how students 10 years before us did school. So now on to the next week. So that Monday, October 8th, we were introduced to our project for this intensive. Now, every intensive except the first intensive had a project to go with it. This is also the case with sophomore and one junior year intensive. The only exception was the last intensive of junior year. We had an online class for it. But that's been discussed in Storytime 22. Let's stay in freshman year. So for this project, we had to get together with the group that we did the box chart with and make a trifold on one of the things we talked about while on the tour. Then in November, we were going to present these trifolds. I'll discuss who will present later on. So what exactly did my group do? Well, we decided to go do the trifold on both the folk singer and the banjo player. Originally, we'll see later on how this trifold evolved into something different. But kind of what our idea for the project was that the center would be about music in general in terms of the history of the city. Then one side would have the folk singer, and the other would have the banjo player. Work went pretty well. I planned out everything on the trifold was going to go, and another student did a lot of the research and the information on the Google document he shared with us, and then we glued all the information down. We generally worked on this project in seminar on Tuesdays, but we also worked on it if we had time the other 4 days. So let's take a step back from intensives. How about we discuss crew, more specifically Friday, October 12th. So this will also be a strange day for Friday, like the week before. We didn't have high school classes on this day. Instead, we did something for crew. We did the Amazing Crew Race. So what is the Amazing Crew Race? Well, it's a thing our school does each year where each crew competes in a race against one another. The first crew to finish the race wins. That means that they get to choose their crew color first. So how exactly did this crew race work? Well, there were certain stations we had to go to. Each station would tell us where to go next. Each station was located in a different classroom. Now, I don't remember the classroom part of the crew race. However, I do remember the final station. I remember that we were given the clue to go to the multi-purpose room. It also stated that it was our last crew. So that's when me and Hunter started bolting out the door. Like, I remember both of us Naruto running from the freshman hallway all the way to the multi-purpose room. Hunter almost ran into someone. I believe the rest of the crew arrived about 30 seconds later. So now, what was for us in the multi-purpose room? Well, we had to stack cups with something I forgot. However, there was a catch with this one. Only the freshmen could do this. The sophomores and the juniors would watch and help us, but they couldn't do it themselves. So me as well as the other freshmen were pretty much struggling to get the cups stacked. It fell a couple times, but we did it. We did only get second, unfortunately. The reason is because the world history teacher's crew beat us. However, they had a habit of cheating in many crew competitions. I believe there was actually someone who picked up a cup with their bare hands on this team. Pay attention to them, as they would do it as they're going to cheat multiple times. As much as we caught them, they never got punished, which kind of sucks since we should have won this competition. So then we got to choose our color. I believe we went with purple, but that's all I remember from it. This would be the color of our t-shirt, in case you want to know what I mean by our colors. For crew, not for intensives. So then that brings us to study hall. You know, the class we were supposed to do community help work in? Well, supposed to. I didn't. But this would be when our study hall teacher got pretty frustrated. Well, I've talked about this before, but okay, this would be like this would be the start of the time where like he started y'all remember like it's hard to talk. I'm gonna scratch that. I basically edited something in there while editing the script. I actually put that. So I mean I'm basically repeating information. So I'm just gonna script that. Let's move on. So now I want to talk about a second project we're doing regarding to the city tour alongside the trifold, but it was not for intensives, it was actually for English. This project was where we had to write a 5-paragraph essay about what identifies us. How a 5-paragraph essay works is that the first paragraph is the introduction, the second, third, and fourth paragraph are the body paragraphs that outline one argument each, and then the final paragraph was the conclusion. So since this is about writing about my own experiences, you think that this assignment was a cakewalk. I mean, I've written 30 story times that range from 1,000 words to 27,000. So writing a 400-page essay should be easy. Well, I've only been doing story time for 7 months now, and this was almost 3 years ago. Back then, I hadn't mastered my own writing style along with being uncomfortable about writing about myself. So this was a challenge. So how exactly did the process of writing this essay work? Well, we were given an outline, and we basically wrote from that. We did this as homework as I believe October 15th. I remember complaining about this with my friends because I felt like it was too excessive for one night. I believe I stayed up to like 12 o'clock doing it, but it really wasn't excessive. We had class time that day to do it in seminar, and we had time in English as well. And that was our assignment for English, so that kind of proves just how stupid I was as a freshman. After that, we got our essays peer-reviewed. This is where another student looked over our essay and told us what we did right and what we needed to improve on. I forgot who reviewed my essay, but they basically outlined all that shit, so I corrected it. Then afterwards, we had to rewrite the essay but without all the mistakes we made on the template, and of course not being on the template. We were given until October 26th to do it. I believe I completely finished mine on October 24th, as that's the date that Google Docs says that I last edited it on, so I guess I just finished early. So what identifies me? What were my 3 arguments? Well, I wrote about the things that identify me are my personality, success, and knowledge, which I agree with even today, although I think I could have combined success and knowledge since those are correlated with each other. I also decided to reread this essay just to see how bad it did. Surprisingly, I actually didn't do that bad. Yeah, I was actually pretty impressed by the fact that I wrote this as a freshman. Seems like my teacher was impressed too. She gave me 100 for this essay. There were, however, quite a lot of grammatical mistakes, as well as a couple lines that weren't very cohesive, but for a 14-year-old, this is a pretty solid essay. Of course, 17-year-old me now can write a way better essay, but this is still a good foundation for future essays I had to write that year. I'm not going to read it out since it does include a few very personal details, but I still thought it was good. That basically wraps up all of October, so then that brings me to November. So like October, this month also had a lot going for it. Some good, some bad, and some I don't even know. November 2018 was a weird month for me. So how about we return to the trifold project for intensive? So this was when we ran into a problem. Our teacher looked over our project and said that we were supposed to do a poster of only one aspect, not 2. So therefore, we basically had to start all the way from scratch. Well, actually we didn't. One dude in our group just went above and beyond and brought his own trifold and basically completed the entire project for us. He did it only on the banjo player. It worked out perfectly. Of course, looked over this dude's trifold, and it seemed like all the information was correct. Yeah, this dude's incredible. So now that brings me to the question, who are we presenting the trifold to? Well, we were going to present our trifolds to our parents at student-led conferences. Now, you're probably wondering what in the hell a student-led conference is. Well, the name speaks for itself. Student-led conferences, or SLCs as they're referred to them as, are kind of like parent-teacher conferences, but it's where the students lead them. We were provided with an SLC binder at the beginning of the year. Most students just kept their SLC binder in their seminar teacher's room. I, however, kept mine to help store papers and other stuff. So this binder is one of the 2 things that determine our seminar grade. The other was, of course, intensive projects, not including essays since those were for in English. In order to pass SLCs, and basically pass seminar, we had to have our teacher's signature on the table of contents of our binder. We were given a table of contents for everything we had to have for each class. There were 2 different tables of contents. One had Algebra 1 and the other had Geometry. I of course had the Geometry one. There was also World History on both. I just simply marked out that since I took World History in 8th grade. Each binder had different sections for different classes. One was dedicated to English. For English, I believe we had to include a couple quizzes, or what identifies as essay, and on our Chromebooks we would show our parents our To Kill a Mockingbird trial, although in our case we didn't have to since there was no video for it. Then there was Geometry. I believe it was just a couple tests, a couple quizzes, and a couple homework assignments. Then there was College. Here we basically just pulled up our grades for college. Then there was one for intensives. As this SLC in particular, we had to present our trifold with our group to our parents. This counted as the intensive portion. And then finally, there was crew. For this, we showed our parents our crew book and also attempted to explain what crew is, even though nobody knows what the hell crew is. So, how many SLCs do students do? Well, each student normally does 4. One in the fall freshman year, one in the spring freshman year, one in the fall sophomore year, and the other in the spring sophomore year. I say normally because I only did 3 SLCs. I didn't do an SLC during the spring of my sophomore year, as that was when coronavirus began. Now, juniors do junior interviews, which is where they get interviewed by some pretty high-up officials in the school system. I never did junior interviews due to coronavirus. Then seniors do senior talks, where they basically do kind of like what I do on Storytime, but with other students. I'm not sure if we're going to do them or not this year. Hopefully we do, but I guess we'll just have to see. So back to SLCs. We did them on Thursday, November 15th. Mom attended my SLC. Dad couldn't since he was at work. Overall, it went pretty well. We presented our trifold and it was successful. I then showed Mom my SLC binder. Now, the school was intending on having our parents grade our SLCs, like our performance and other stuff, but they ultimately just scratched the idea since it really wouldn't count as anything since the binder was already graded by our teacher, so it was just me showing her the binder, and then we headed back home. Overall, pretty easy. I do, however, disapprove of how my school operates SLCs. While I think SLCs are a great and excellent one thing my school does great, and they're just one thing, like my school does a lot of things great, I feel like they stress them too much. Like, sure, they are what determine our seminar grade, but I feel like they put too much emphasis on them when in reality, they aren't that important. Don't get me wrong, they're very important, but they aren't that crazy. It's just having the things in your binder and getting it signed. It's not rocket science. But other than that, I do really love the concept of SLCs. I think it's a great way for parents to learn about how an expeditionary learning school works, and just overall a great thing my school does. It just doesn't need to be emphasized as much as it is, or was, since we didn't do SLCs last year due to COVID. So finally, SLCs are over. My next SLC will be for April. This is going to be a very important event, as we'll see later on. Weird that I completely forgot about it in Storytime too, even though I included the first one. Oh well, this Storytime I'll actually talk about it. So let's go to community health. So we were tasked to write a research paper on any public health issue. I chose to write about drugs and alcohol. I wrote it out and it was about 3 pages long. I thought it was great, so I let Mom review it. And she said that it was horrible. She said that I was going to make a 70 on it. I got pretty frustrated with her. I didn't add any of the recommendations she had. Interestingly, this was a time where my stubbornness came in helpful. I'm glad I never took any of my mom's advice. This paper was worth 600 points total. Mom said that I would only earn 420 points. I ended up earning 599 points on this paper. The only reason I lost 1 point was because I made a mistake when making an in-text citation. But needless to say, I was really happy. I told Mom and she didn't even believe me until I pulled up the grade. Since then, she's never reviewed any of my papers or any projects in general, so it's pretty obviously I know what I'm doing. Although, since she actually did edit my college essay, college application essay, since I wrote the essay after I wrote the script, so I just want to update that. Now let's talk about English. So English was not going well. I mean, it hadn't been since August, but this is what I consider to be when English starts to get extremely heated. So we were reading a book called Speak. It's basically a book about this one rising freshman who gets raped at a party and calls the cops. Everyone then basically proceeds to hate her. Since they didn't know what happened, she basically has to endure all that the whole school year. Pretty crazy story. Now, this book was a very easy read. We normally only had to read one chapter every night or in 2 nights. I found myself getting pretty far ahead due to this book being pretty easy, as well as just being very well written in general. So by the time this class was 3/4 of the way into the book, I had already finished. This would prove to not be a good thing. Why was this not a good thing? Well, it caused me to not have anything to do. So back then as a freshman, as well as when I was a sophomore, I had to do something. Like if I wasn't doing something, I would go crazy. Junior year would be when that wasn't the case anymore. But this would be where this trait just got the best of me. So we were basically ordered to read, to get ahead. I, of course, had already finished the book, so I had nothing to do. Well, I had schoolwork for other classes, but I just completely ignored them because I was stupid. So I just sat there on my computer doing God knows what. That's when my English teacher saw me. Now, this wasn't the first time she caught me. She caught me in multiple times before, but this time she had had enough. So that's when I was ordered to move to sit at a desk right beside hers. To my defense, you could say that I had everything done, but it's not a matter of completion, it's a matter of productivity. I wasn't doing anything productive, and this new seat wouldn't be for long. I'd go back to my normal seat in early December. Pretty crazy to think that, yeah, I was once that kid. Now look at me. I'd come to realize just how dumb I was throughout the freshman year and near the end of the school year, but I really wish I knew sooner because shit like this happened quite a lot in English and in crew. Now I want to talk about geometry for a minute. I specifically want to talk about a project we had for geometry. Yeah, math projects. Apparently those exist. So what this project was is that we had to make a triangle and be able to hold it on 3 nails. We could use any material for the triangle, by the way. I chose just a piece of paper. We then had to find at the middle of the triangle. This would be where we placed our triangle on the nails. To do this, we had to use some trigonometric functions and some other stuff. Pretty easy. I made an A on this. Now I want to jump back to English for a sec. So the reason we read Speak was to cover symbolism. Ironic that the narrator, the girl who was raped, forgot her name. She literally complained about symbolism being useless in the book. And here we are talking about symbolism within the book. I thought that was really funny. One of the most important symbols in this book was the tree. The narrator liked to draw, but she had a special talent for drawing trees. So our project for this book was to draw a tree with stuff that represents us. Kind of similar to what Identifies Me essay, but this was more literal stuff, not figurative. For this stuff, we could basically just print out pictures. So what did I put on my tree? I'm not too sure, but I believe there were multiple aspects of it that had quite a lot of symbolism. The weather was, I believe, nighttime during a storm that not only represents my favorite time of the day and my favorite weather, but it also represents the events of March 8th, which happened just 8 months prior to this. The tree itself also included multiple things that represented me. A couple things included on the tree included a mudkip to represent my favorite Pokemon, a cross to represent my religion, I believe a computer to represent what I do in my free time, and a few other things I forgot. I had quite a lot of fun doing this project, and I did pretty well on it. So now let's talk about a little bit about academic support. The college class overall wasn't too important this semester, but there was a pretty stupid situation that happened in this class. Well, actually, outside. Let me explain. So this class had 8 modules. A bunch of students had not done Module 5, which was due back in October. I had already finished Module 5. However, I guess my professor accidentally wrote my name on this list of students who didn't have the modules completed. So then my advisor gathers me and a few others and basically scolds us for not having it done. I then said, I completed it. She didn't argue that I was on the list, so I pulled up the module and showed that it was completed. Even then, she still argued that I was on the list. Just really stupid. So then I want to talk about crew. So in crew, we were building a Rube Goldberg machine. So this is where you get a machine that has multiple steps to be able to perform a task in the most complicated way possible. Normally, it's just the sophomores and juniors who do this. So of course, as a freshman, I didn't do much. All I remember about this project was that we had to get an army man to fall from the parachute. I don't remember much because I never did a whole lot in crew back in freshman and sophomore year. Of course, in junior year, we had crew for like a month, where I did a ton since I was the only junior. But I never did too much in crew. I believe the school was trying to get seniors involved in crew. More than likely, they'll make it optional for seniors, which I'll probably do, but I never did much in crew, which is kind of a shame because if I did, I'd have a lot more to talk about here. I also want to mention a little thing in crew called fitness. Each month we had a fitness day where we'd try to do as many push-ups and sit-ups as possible. Then on another day we would do running, where we would try to run 100 meters as fast as possible. For the first few months, I did these legitimately, but after maybe November, I just wrote down random numbers. Crew wasn't a grade, so it really didn't matter. We didn't do fitness in sophomore year for whatever reason, and then we couldn't do it in junior year, and I highly doubt we'll do it in senior year. So now before I move on to December, I want to mention that November was the month that I saw the end to a time period. The time period being, of course, the post-depression period part 1. It lasted from the day I got discharged from the mental hospital on March 13th all the way to around November. This is the best time period of my life. So many great things occurred. I did an entire story time on it. It's Storytime 20 if you'd like to check it out. But the reason it ended was mostly due to all the fights I had in English, as well as due to the demotivation to swim. It also somewhat had to do with stress in general, since I was really stressed out as a freshman. I mean, taking both high school and college courses at only 14 years old is pretty difficult, so that all resulted in the best days of my life coming to an end. Fortunately, this time period was part 1 for a reason. There's going to be a part 2 that will begin in March of 2019. I'll explain later on. This meant that from November of 2018 to March of 2019, I went through a time period often called the intermission period. It was a time period that was overall pretty bad, not a time period I want to go back to. It did have some great moments though, but it also had some pretty foul moments. Definitely not as bad as the depression period, but still pretty sucky. So then finally we reached December. The last month of 2018. 2018 was a very crazy year. In just 1 year, I went from being suicidal to having the best 8 months of my life. Going to early college, making new friends, giving my life to Christ, all the way to uploading super cringy Pokemon videos that I'm glad are not public anymore. Yeah, pretty crazy year. Second best year of my life. So let's wrap it up, shall we? To start, I want to talk about watching the movie for Speak, because holy shit, this movie was awful. The acting. Like, I couldn't tell if I was watching Speak or if I was watching a Darman video. The acting in this movie was so bad. Sucks too because the book was really good, but god, the acting was so trash. So December was of course the end of the semester, and as a result, we had some finals to take. Well, for me, I only had to take 2 finals, one for geometry and the other for computers. While English did have a final, it was a year-long course, so it wouldn't be until May. There was no midterm for it, by the way, and then my other college courses didn't have a final. So let's talk about the geometry final. Now, they combined us freshmen with the sophomores, as the sophomores were taking geometry during the same time we were. They would also take Algebra 2 the same time we did. We're just doing it earlier than them. Now, overall, this was a pretty forgettable exam. I don't even remember how I did on this test, although I probably made above a 90 since I made an A in geometry overall. I do remember that we had one kid who was ordered to ask, do we need to put our calculator in degrees? Basically, when doing trigonometry on a calculator, you have to set your calculator to degrees mode. Its normal mode is in radians. Our teacher then said, I cannot tell you if you have to put your calculator in degrees. This would remind us all to put our calculator in degrees. So since there wasn't much to talk about on this test, how about we switch over to the final exam for computers? So this was a lot more memorable. Computers was a very difficult class, and this test was no exception. I was sitting at an 83, and I wanted to keep my grade at a B, so I studied as much as I could for this test. Then came test day, which was cancelled due to snow. So then the actual test date was Friday, December 14th. I was ready, so I whipped open my Chromebook, and holy shit, there's 100 questions. Oh no. And I only had an hour 15 minutes to take it. So I tried my very best, and I made a 63. Sounds bad, right? Well, that was actually really good. It only dropped my grade to an 82. So I actually did great. Dad picked me up that day, in which he of course asked me about what I made. I told him, and he was pretty happy too. It doesn't matter that I failed my final exam. All that matters is that I secured my B in the class. So we celebrated by getting some Chick-fil-A. Now let's discuss crew. So in crew, we were learning about orienteering. So therefore, our crew held an orienteering competition. You'd follow a set of coordinates that led to some object that represents that your crew finished all your coordinates. I don't remember what the object was. The crew that had the most objects won. We started work on planning out coordinates right after we finished our Rube Goldberg. I remember me and the rest of my crew just running around the campus like faceless chickens. I remember in particular a junior would be hiding the object or jotting down a coordinate, while I would be on the lookout making sure nobody was around. We had a lot of fun. As for the actual competition, we didn't win, but for basically the same reasons as before. The same crew that cheated during the Amazing Crew race also just happens to cheat during the orienteering competition. I don't quite remember how they cheated in this competition. All I know is that they cheated. That's all that matters. Now let's fast forward a bit to December 19th. This is the final day before the school let us out for Christmas break. So as a way to celebrate, they basically had the whole school in the multi-purpose room. We could do multiple things. They had the Polar Express playing. I believe my English teacher was doing a dance party in her room, and a few other activities. What did I do? Well, I had a freshman moment and fell asleep. Yeah, I fell asleep during the fun day. I believe Dylan had to wake me up when it was over. Pretty funny situation. I guess I just didn't get enough sleep the night before. So then comes Christmas break. I had a really good Christmas that year. I finally got myself a new phone. I got an iPhone 6. The phone I lost was a 5S. I would take much better care of this phone than my old phone. So good that I kept that phone for 2 years. In fact, the video where I announced Storytime was actually recorded with that phone. Of course, for Christmas 2020, I would get an XR, which is far superior than the 6 ever could be. And that's what I used to record Storytime before I streamed Storytime. But it's still a great present. I also got a few Pokemon games as well as some convenience items and clothes too. So great Christmas. So the day after Christmas, we went to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. The trip was overall pretty boring, mostly just because we shopped the whole time and never really did anything fun. We did take another trip back to Gatlinburg back in April this year, and that was fun at least. And then finally, 2018 is over. Second best year of my life, but by far the absolute craziest year. Just so much happened within the span of a year. So now, how about we move on to the best year of my life? Yep, 2019. This is probably the only year I actually want to go back to. 2018 was great, but I do not want to go back to it. I'd hate to have to deal with all that happened at the beginning of the year. 2016 is a maybe. That was a good year as well, but even it had some bads. But 2019, hell yeah. The first 3 months were a little rough, but the rest of 2019 was an absolute blast. So now January 2019. Not exactly the best month, but I mean that's how every month during the intermission period worked. This would of course be the beginning of a new semester, meaning I had new college courses. So let's talk about them. First up was Introduction to Communications. This was my Monday and Wednesday class. It was a really fun class, especially the teacher. She was awesome. I think it was mostly because while much older than all of us, our professor was really up to date. Like she used the same slang that we use without making it sound cringy and was just overall talk like us. Now what I remember from this class though was the task. So the class included 4 tasks, each worth about 15% of our grade. Task 1 was in February, Task 2 was in March, Task 3 was in April, and Task 4 was in May. I'll discuss each task as we go through the semester. Then I had health. So I remember health being very forgettable. Each day we had a quiz about the topics from the day before. Well, 2 days prior, since this class was on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Communications was on Mondays and Wednesdays. Anyways, we basically talked about exercising, eating healthy, being mentally healthy, and of course, sex. Overall, a really easy but forgettable class. Then my Friday class was Intro to Business. So at first, I hated this class, but the more I did this class, the more I loved it. The main reason I hated this class at first was due to its time. It lasted from 9 o'clock all the way to 11:15. That's a long time for a business class. And of course, I was only 14 years old, so I got pretty bored very easily. I did eventually find a way to make this class fun by buying snacks from the vending machine before class, but that wouldn't be until late February. So for now, I was pretty bored. The professor was pretty cool though. He was retired, but he taught business as a part-time job. I believe before retiring, he owned a steel plant in Pennsylvania. He also had really bad ears. Like I sat right next to him, and sometimes he struggled to hear me whenever I asked a question. Still a really cool guy nonetheless. One thing we did quite a lot in business was these group assignments, where we'd get together with a group and be ordered to write about some topic on a big whiteboard. Then the professor would go on for like 15 minutes about the certain topic. I mean, sure, it did at least prove our professor had the knowledge to teach the class, but it was way more humorous than it was informative, because he'd just go on and time would just pass. It's like, dude, you got 5 more groups, gotta get them to go. Oh, and the way he spoke made me laugh too. Like anytime he said business, he said it in the funniest tone. Like he put so much emphasis on the biz, which resulted in saying business. I don't know if this is just a he thing or if people up north actually say it that way. All I know is that it was pretty funny every time. Now the final class was of course an online class. It was my replacement for World History since World History is a year-long class at our school. I'll talk about it in February. I also want to talk about another professor I didn't have, but my friends had. The reason I mention this professor is because he was the butt of many jokes we made. Anyways, he was my friend's technology and society professor. According to Lucas, he was really bad, but also really crazy. He was huge. So huge that his shirts didn't even fit him. Like whenever he tried to write on the whiteboard, according to Lucas as well as a few other friends too, his shirt would come up and you could see his back. Yeah, pretty huge. And then I also heard from Dylan that not only was he a straight grader, but he was excessive with it. Like he took off 5 points for grammatical mistakes. Like, come on man, you're dealing with a bunch of 14-year-olds. Give them a little bit of slack. Dylan also mentioned that this is the only class he didn't make an A in, so that should prove just how bad and crazy this professor was overall. That also brings me to new high school course, being Algebra 2. This class is meant for 11th graders, but our school has 10th graders take Geometry and Algebra 2 back to back, and of course in my case it was 9th grade since I took Algebra 1 in 8th grade. So this was basically Algebra 1, but bigger and more complex concepts. Pretty straightforward overall. At the time, Algebra was my best math, so this class was overall pretty easy. Of course now that's not the case, as trigonometry is now my best math, but at least this class was pretty easy, unlike English. So let's talk about English. So now we were reading The Joy Luck Club. This is a book about 4 women who moved to the United States from China right before Mao Zedong took power. This is basically 20 to 40 years after they moved out, but they do explain things like their past in China and going to the US and other stuff. This was a pretty unusual read in my opinion, as it felt like multiple stories in one book. I think the author could have done a better job connecting everything, as it just seemed like the stories were all over the place. Although I can't really say much since this was written by a 16-year-old girl, but definitely a strange book. I can't really decide if I like this book or not just because of how weird it was. Then that brings me to my relationship with my English teacher. So as pointed out before, we were still in a huge conflict. However, I say this is the month that started to calm it down. We still got in arguments and shit like that, but this would be where the good moments started to become more prevalent. I think it's mostly because in quarter 2, I made a 94 in English. So I think my English teacher decided to be a little bit less strict on me in quarter 3. That would actually prove to be harmful, as we'll see later on, but her classes still at least started to become a little more manageable. Probably the moment I remember most in English during this time was a question we were given on a quiz for Joy Luck Club. The quiz was on the chapter of 4 directions, in case you're wondering. Anyways, one of the questions she included on the quiz was, what restaurant did Waverly and her mother eat at? This question ultimately became the butt of many jokes we made in English due to the inconcise clarity of the question. Legit, when I saw this question, my mind goes, why the hell would I know? The restaurant was called 4 Directions. While it might have been obvious due to the title of the chapter, I read off of a PDF and did not include chapter names. It only said chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4 and that stuff. So of course I got it wrong, but still funny nonetheless. Since then, me and everyone else has given our English teacher a hard time about this. Seems like she liked this, as she also joined us in making fun of this question. In fact, she stated that since she gave us this question, she's going to give it to every student every year due to how humorous it was. Well, she did give it to her students last year, but not the year before, as she was going to do the Joy Luck Club in March, which of course got canceled because of COVID. But I think she's at least tried to give this question every year. Hopefully she'll remember to continue that tradition after me and the other seniors graduate. Oh well, some juniors have given her a hard time even though they never had that question, and some sophomores did too, so they'll definitely keep it alive. Maybe the freshmen will do the same when they get this question later on. Now how about we switch over to intensive? This was not a very memorable intensive, but I still remember some stuff about it. So this intensive was about bridges. Yup, those things that get you from one place to another. I'm literally talking about those bridges. So what did we do regarding bridges? Well, we of course started off with the box chart. I don't remember the mystery piece, but it probably had something to do with bridges. The common text was about bridges and how they are made and stuff. Then the expert files were about specific bridge architecture, as well as famous bridges like Golden Gate Bridge or Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Bridges like that. And in the middle box, I'm not sure what exactly my group wrote. More than likely, we wrote bridges. If we did, then we'd be right. And after we did that, our teachers gathered all of us freshmen into the cafeteria. Here they played an episode from some TV show I don't remember the name of, where 2 groups were trying to determine who could build the sturdiest bridge. After the episode ended, the teachers went off about teamwork, so I guess you could say this intensive was at least a little personal and not about bridges. So then it was lunch. After lunch, we had more tasks to do for this intensive. We had one more task. Build a bridge out of toothpicks and marshmallows. We were given 2 hours to build it. After that 2 hours was up, the bridge had to carry something. I believe the bridge also had to be like 3 inches off the ground. The materials we were given at the beginning of the task were all the materials we could use. We couldn't get more, so as you could tell, this is going to be a very difficult task. So how did it go for me? Who the hell was even in my group? Well, it was me and 3 girls. I believe we split each other into different tasks. I was the guy who did the planning as well as a lot of other math, since math was my strong suit. 1 girl worked as the leader, and then 2 actually built the bridge. While they built the bridge, I kept count of the number of toothpicks and marshmallows we had, as well as helped them follow my design. In the end, it was unsuccessful. While the bridge was able to stay standing, it wasn't able to handle that item they put it on. I think the reason isn't because the girls didn't follow my design or my calculations were wrong. It was probably because of the design to begin with. I don't remember it too well, but it was probably really bad. I think I focused too much on aesthetics rather than the power, so that's why it failed. But like the intensive back in October, our main task is not the only thing we did for the intensive. We also had an essay for English to go along with it. This time we actually talked about mental bridges. Mental bridges are people that connect you somewhere, either maturity or wisdom or whatever it is. I know a very weird explanation, but I don't really remember that stuff about what a mental bridge is. This was over 2.5 years ago, so I don't remember too much. And plus, the intermission period is generally the time period I write the least about. So I can't remember this as well as the post-depression periods. I can't remember this as well as the post-depression periods or the coronavirus pandemic. Anyways, y'all don't really care about that. Y'all are probably waiting for me to talk about my essay in particular, so let's discuss it. So this is a pretty piss-poor essay. I wrote about my mom being my bridge. My issue with this essay in particular is that mom being my bridge was the main topic. It was not the main topic. It seemed like the focal point in the essay was me criticizing her. I did this a lot in my writings during the intermission period. I criticized my parents quite a lot, which is something I shouldn't have. I mean, sure, I do write about nitpicks I have with them, as well as just stupid stuff they do in general, but I never aim to criticize them. I joke about them. I'm not serious. In this essay, I was dead serious. Why it was such a shitty essay. But ironically, my teacher disagreed with me. She gave me 100. She said that I did everything I was required to, so yeah, at least I got the 100. I still regret writing this essay though. Now let's talk about lunch. So now the reason I bring up lunch is because January 2019 would be the month that me, Dylan, and a few other our friends, a couple sophomores, a bunch of juniors, including Hunter, and a few seniors all gathered outside the multi-purpose room and had some of the most memorable lunches of our lives. This was in the hallway, by the way. I remember these lunches in particular because of me and Dylan specifically. So, I was and still am into a game called Geometry Dash. In case you don't know anything about it, just remember that you die all the time. Like, some levels can take hundreds of attempts, sometimes even thousands. And it's always super frustrating to die at one of the last things in the level. It's extremely easy to rage at this game, and that's exactly what me and Dylan did. We both raged so hard at this game. Like, you could literally hear us shouting the F word from the cafeteria. Funnily enough, no teachers heard us. Either that or they just didn't care. So me and Dylan raged so hard. Those were some great memories. I also want to mention crew. So in crew, we were talking about acts of kindness. So we were assigning someone in crew. Our task was to give them something authentic. It had to be something we created ourselves. We couldn't just buy them a $10 Chick-fil-A card. No, we had to make it ourselves. I was assigned a fellow freshman. I knew he liked mythical creatures, so I drew a dragon. Well, traced a dragon. I suck at drawing, but it seemed like he was really content with my drawing, so all's good. Now, who was assigned me? Well, it was no other than Hunter. Hunter was really good at art, so he decided to draw me a Geometry Dash meme. It was very detailed too. I believe he included the first 5% of finger dashes to drawing, and then he had the meme on the top and bottom parts of the drawing. I don't remember the meme, but I remember I was really happy with this. And then finally, that brings me to February. So February 2019 was overall probably the worst month of 2019. It wasn't that great, but it was better than February. But was it better than February 2018? Hell yeah. So to start, I want to mention my online college course that I took in place of world history. This was an introduction to film. It basically talked about how film criticism worked. Now, I've never been a movie person, but I was at least kind of excited to take this course. Unfortunately, it was a major letdown. The class sucked. The professor had us use his blog site to do our assignments rather than the program we use for college, so it was really confusing having to do that. On top of that, our professor also had some big biases regarding movies. Like, one of my friends actually lost points on a film review simply for giving a good rating to a Nicolas Cage movie. Our film professor hated Nicolas Cage, so he dropped the points. Pretty stupid. So what exactly did we do in film? Well, obviously we watched movies and reviewed them. I mentioned that earlier. There were multiple movies we made reviews for. Each film involved us focusing on a certain aspect of the movie. However, there was one review in particular that focused on all aspects. In fact, it's pretty difficult to call it a film review because it was more of a paper. So instead, this is called our semester project. This was a massive film review on one of the top 100 most influential movies of the 20th century, so no Maze Runner, unfortunately. It had to be between 10 to 22 pages. Now for me, this isn't too much. The average story time is about 20 pages long, with the longest one being 63, that being this story time. But this was almost 2 years before the conception of Storytime, so this was going to be pretty challenging. In fact, this paper would ultimately break the record for the longest paper I ever wrote. It would actually hold the record all the way until I wrote the script for Storytime 2. Now, due to the length of the semester project, we started on it really back when the course began. Although all we did in February was get assigned the semester project as well as receive the rubric for it. So what movie was I assigned? Well, I was assigned Titanic. This is great actually. Despite its long length, I always wanted to see this movie since it's so famous and everyone said they loved it. So I at least had that. Speaking of projects, let's discuss English. So we finished reading the Joy Luck Club. Now in Storytime 2, I completely forgot we even did this project. However, I was talking with my English teacher back in April this year. Apparently she was doing this project with her freshmen at the time, only instead of the Joy Luck Club, she was doing it with Romeo and Juliet. I'll talk about Romeo and Juliet later on. Then in May, we finished reading a book called The Things We Carried, where we also did this project with this book. So these two things helped me remember this project a little bit, although I still don't quite remember much from it, but I'll try my best. So what was this project? Well, it was a Yaya box. Now, what the hell is a Yaya box? A Yaya box is where you have a decorated shoebox. This shoebox represents a character from a book. The outside of the box represents the character on the outside. How do they react to their surroundings or other people? Then on the inside, it represents them on the inside. Things like their thoughts or their memories. My group was tasked to do Lindo Jung. She was known for being a pretty stubborn character overall, and I'm pretty sure she was Waverly's mother if I'm not mistaken. Now, what about my group? Well, I believe it was me, a friend of mine, and 3 girls. I worked with decoration placement as well as planning because I did such an incredible job at the intensive. Nah, I believe I just helped build it. I wasn't a leader or planner or anything. Now, the production of this box started out slowly, as the person responsible for getting the box and the materials in our group was 2 days late getting it. However, once she got the materials, our group worked very hard, so hard we managed to finish it 2 days early. So what exactly did the final product look like? Well, we painted a horse on the top of the box to represent Lindo being the year of the horse. I believe she was born in 1914. We also painted a few other stuff I don't quite remember. The inside was also pretty well decorated, which of course I still don't remember. I believe we used materials like string and cotton, but that's all I really remember. However, I do remember my English teacher being very impressed with this project. She gave our group 100 on it. She even made the comment that she loved how much detail was put onto it, as well as how beautiful it looked. She used this project to show off for our school's invitational meeting, which is where we introduce 8th graders interested in our school to our school, and how we do things. I don't know any juniors who saw this project when they were at the invitational meeting, but it's still cool that they got to see this project. Since we're discussing English, how about we talk about crew again? So we were working on a crew shield. We already made a flag, so now how about a shield? Now, I remember this crew project pretty well, not because I did a lot of work on it, but because I didn't do a lot of work on it. In fact, I actually didn't do anything for this project. Why? Well, it really boils down to freshman me being a dumbass, as well as because freshmen just don't do much in crew. I actually talked with the other freshmen that were in my crew, and it seems like they didn't do much in crew in freshman year either. They also didn't do much in sophomore year either. Then in junior year, they were all remote, leaving me being the only junior in crew, so I guess I wasn't alone. Now, the reason I remember being unproductive on this project was because one day, I got into some trouble with my English teacher. So me and 2 juniors were sitting on the table with our phones doing nothing while a couple people were working on the shield. Our teacher noticed this and basically took our phones. We 3 didn't do anything, although we still got our phones. We still didn't do anything, although we still got our phones back at the end of this crew. Now, generally, as a freshman, whenever I was punished or get scolded by my English teacher, I generally didn't improve. However, surprisingly, I actually kind of did a little better. Not much, but a little bit. I at least tried to do some work, although the shield was already finished, so it wasn't with the project. I do more in crew at least. Now, how about we discuss algebra? So we were doing another math project. We did multiple other math projects in between, by the way, just that I don't remember them very well. This and the triangle are the only 2 math projects I remember. So in algebra, we were discussing cubic and quartic functions. So the project that went along with this topic was a birthday polynomial. This is where we had to create a polynomial using our birthday as well as any random numbers. We had to create a poster that included our birthday, our polynomial we came up with, our polynomial factor, the graph for the polynomial, as well as other information about the polynomial such as the maximum and minimum. Now, my birthday is June 21st, 2004, so the equation I decided to go with was 512x to the power of 4 minus 1664x to the power of 3 plus 328x to the power of 2 plus 164x plus 12. Its factor form is 2x minus 6 times 4x minus 2 times 8x plus 1 squared. I don't really remember where all the numbers came into play, but I guess I'm creating the factored form first, and then I used full to process it to put it in standard form. Now, this project is one of my proudest projects I've ever made. To this day, I absolutely love this project. The reason is because of how much I worked on it. I worked extremely hard on this project. I even did smart lunch just to work on it. My teacher also helped me out with it. I made this as pretty and colorful as I could, and it paid off in the end. I made 100. Prior to this project, I don't think I'd ever put that much dedication into one project, but I did this at this time, and it ultimately helped me put more dedication in future projects, as well as other stuff outside school, like Storytime example. It's really just, I learned how, basically, the best explanation is from this project, I learned how satisfying it is to create hard work and hard work paying off, so that's why I started becoming more productive on projects. It especially benefited me in junior year for American history, because we did a ton of projects in that class, so it helped out there. Speaking of writing, how about we discuss communications? What I mean is task 1. Task 1 was a self-reflection assignment, where we had to write about 2 paragraphs for 4 of the 7 provided questions. In other words, we were doing a story time, but without reading it on YouTube, as this was just between us and our instructor. So what did I write about? Well, one question was where I or someone else perceived someone incorrectly. I wrote about the bullies in 8th grade. I didn't get into too much detail, but I explained how since we were all taking the same classes, that we're probably all going to be at least a little more mature and a little more wise. Turns out that wasn't the case, as most of y'all know the story already. Another question was about describing a self-fulfilling prophecy that came true. I wrote about the conflict at church. At the time, I was still trying to make up my relationships with everyone before I just left myself out of everything. So now I didn't exactly write about one coming true. I wrote about one that I predicted to come true, and it did come true. I wrote about how everyone at church is going to look back and regret their actions at Fuge and in freshman Sunday school. That actually happened 2 weeks after I started isolating myself in July. A couple boys tried to talk to me. I, of course, just turned them down and didn't say anything since I'm not a dumbass. The next one was about self-disclosure. One had to do with how it benefited you, and the other described another situation where it negatively impacted you. I got a little personal here. I discussed March 8th, 2018, talking about how it benefited me. I talked about revealing my plan, and my thoughts managed to get me the help I needed. That, of course, was the time I benefited. The time it harmed me was telling my parents I hated swimming and wanted to quit. So this would be the month where I truly wanted to quit the swim team. I dreaded swimming. It's really all thanks to my coach being an asshole. He made sure to make practices and meets as bad as he could make them. I was still swimming during this time, and it wouldn't be until March where I'd finally quit, which I'll discuss a bit later. But the reason this relates to harming me is because at the time, Dad was extremely set on me swimming. My sister also wanted to quit swimming. Mom was on our side, as she hated the coach due to how rude he was. So we clashed quite a lot throughout this months of February and March. So in a way, this kind of harmed me at the time. Of course, this task was done in mid-February, so I still hadn't seen the long-term effects as telling Dad that I wanted to quit would actually benefit me about a month later. The final question wasn't necessarily about myself. It was more of a philosophical question about the Johari window, not witness. It was about what it was, and also asked if we could really know the unknown self. Nothing too much to discuss. Now I thought I did very well in this task. Sure, I did criticize my parents as well as other people quite a lot throughout this task, but I did it in the right way. I remember one quote from the task, but what I need to remember is that we're all human, just like how I make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes too. I also occasionally put the blame on myself in some situations, which is definitely very mature to do, rather than blaming others. So overall, I think that even now, I think I did very well on this task. My professor agreed, and she gave me 100. But oddly enough, someone else also was very impressed too. That would be my principal. So our principal can look at what we're doing and what we're writing. So he decided to one day check out what I was writing. He was very impressed with it. So he called me to his office one morning in English. Hey, he chose the best part of the day to call me too. Perfect. We talked about the task I was writing. He stated that from what he can see in the task that I was very wise, which I agree with. I think since the events of March 8th, I've definitely gotten a lot wiser. I still haven't have all that much wisdom, as we've seen throughout freshman year. He then gave me a note that said, "You're doing awesome, keep it up," and sent me back to class. Really interesting that happened. This was also somewhat of a motivator for me, as I'd start to, once again, just like how obviously English teacher punching me, I also started to get better from here, because one thing that our school does is we like to reward the good, and so I think that actually works for me because it helps me improve. So, and this situation, as example, helped me want to improve and get better. Now, I finished this task really quickly. I legit finished this task about 3 days after it was assigned. So for the rest of the time we were working on it, I was just playing Clash of Clans. Pretty funny situation, actually. Everyone's doing work. They aren't allowed on their phone, and then there's me who finished early, so I'm on my phone. But before I wrap up February, I want to go back to film. So at the end of February, we had our first film review. I forgot what exactly we were reviewing, but I do remember doing my film review on Annie Hall. Now, I hate romances, but I love comedies. This show was kind of a mix of both. A bunch of humor, a lot of love, and a lot of sex. Surprisingly, I actually liked this movie. I thought the storyline was pretty good, and Woody Allen and his team overall did a great job. I didn't do too well on the review though. I made a 74 on it, but I mean, it's not that bad considering it was, after all, my first film review. So now that brings me to March. So March 2019 was a weird-ass month. It had a mix of really bad days, but also had a mix of really good days. Late March in particular was an incredible time to be alive, as I'll discuss when we get there. So the beginning as well as mid-March was overall pretty bad. A lot of it had to do with really the same reason as to why the intermission period just sucked. I was still fighting to quit swimming, and I was still in conflict with my English teacher. However, this would be the month that really changed the course of actions for these two situations. So let's start with business. So now business was pretty fun. I started buying some snacks from the vending machine before class, which made business more manageable. However, now it was midterm exam time. However, this as well as the final exam were actually really fun to do. The reason is because they weren't just simply answering the questions. They were essay questions. We could choose 5 out of 10 questions. We then wrote a short essay for each question. We had to cite 2 sources for each essay. We could use the book as one citation for each question, but we'd have to use an outside source such as a website for the other. We could then do a 6th question for extra credit. I, of course, did 6. As stated before, I had a lot of fun doing this midterm. It was really cool diving into different topics and learning about them. I ended up making 111 on this. The midterm counted 20% of our grade, so you bet this increased my grade drastically. Now, the intermission period for the most part was pretty bad. Early March was of course really bad as well. Having to go to swim practice was always dreadful. I just hated it, as well as getting into fights with my English teacher too always sucked. But there was one day I remember during this time that was incredible. It was mentioned in Storytime 24. That would be Friday, March 8th, 2019. So first off, this day was very significant because it marked the 1-year anniversary of the events of March 8th, 2018. That was the worst day of my life, so me and my parents decided to do something special. So I woke up at 6:30, normal time. I of course went into the kitchen and my parents had breakfast made for me. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, basically the deal. So I ate that. Mom also made my lunch for that day. Dad then gave me $20 to spend at the vending machines, so already I was in a great mood. Then I got to school, so the day of course started off with crew. Fortunately for me, my English teacher was not there that day, so instead we had to go to a different crew room. I was with my algebra teacher. Dylan was also in this crew, so that was just perfect. They really weren't doing much, so me and Dylan just chatted. Lucas was not in the crew, however, his crew leader wasn't at school either, so he was ordered to go here. So us three just joked around and did nothing. Then it came time for college. My Friday course was of course business. So business on this day was pretty fun. I bought a bunch of snacks and drinks right before. Our professor allowed us to eat and drink in class during class. Some professors don't, so I was pretty lucky. I sat beside a friend, so I shared my snacks with him, which put him in a good mood too. I remember one time our professor, whose desk is right in front of ours, leaned over and kind of just joked around with us. He asked, "Y'all having a feast over there?" And then we just laughed. After business came lunch. Now, lunch itself wasn't too special. However, I did receive a note from Mom. So normally, I hate receiving notes from Mom. I don't know, I just think it's weird. But this day was special, so I let it slide. Then in English, our teacher, of course, wasn't there, so we didn't do much. The rest of the school day too was just normal. However, after school would be where things went back to celebrating mode. We were originally going to go to Cracker Barrel for dinner. However, I had to record a YouTube video, so we just ordered pizza instead. Overall, a really nice way to celebrate the fact that I was in a better place and no longer depressed. I do remember that weekend though being really rough. I was still fighting to quit swim. Both that Saturday and Sunday, we as a family got into a lot of arguments. Basically me, my sister, and my mom fighting off against my dad. Despite us three completely outnumbering him, Dad still forced us to swim. He would fortunately change his mind just 2 weeks later though. So then really the next week was kind of normal. However, this will be the beginning of mid-March. This is when me and my English teacher really stopped arguing. I think she started to respect me and overall, English was getting a lot better. However, I still did not respect her. That would change in April at least. There's also a project for business I want to mention that was due this week. So this project was split into 2 parts. One part was due Friday, March 15th, and the other wouldn't be due until April 26th. Anyways, part 1 was where we had to ask someone we know who has a budget and interview them on how they budget. Well, we all just simply asked our professor, as of course he has to use a budget for the school. So all of us interviewed him together and it was pretty easy. But the next week had a little bit more going on. I specifically want to mention Tuesday, March 19th, more specifically swim practice that night. So I had a freshman moment at that practice. I left my book bag at practice. Yikes. I needed it for the next day. Fortunately, Mom was able to get in contact with someone with a key, so I was able to get back in the next morning. And lucky for me, my book bag was still there. I also got lucky with this, because that thing had my Chromebook as well as a bunch of other valuable stuff too. Had I lost it, I would have been in some deep trouble. But that wasn't the only reason that practice was special. It was also special because that would be my last swim practice. That brings me to Saturday, March 23rd. Like March 8th, just 2 weeks prior, this was also one of the best days of my life. I of course mentioned it in Storytime 24. So to start, I woke up really happy. It was just one of my good days, so I was in a good mood. Then Dad announced that we were going to go out to eat for lunch, so I was in an even better mood. So we went out to eat. We went to this one kind of country redneck restaurant. I won't mention its name since it's local, but nobody was there. So as a family, we as a family spent our time outside on the patio. On the patio, they have a ring toss game where you try to throw a ring connected to a string onto a hook. It's a lot more complicated than it sounds. But basically, we just played it before getting our food. Then we got our food. This is the part that makes the rest of the day. Dad announced that he was going to let me and my sister quit swimming. Wow. Just 2 weeks prior, he was set on us swimming, and now he's letting us quit. Thank God. So this would be what I consider to be the beginning of the post-depression period part 2. I mean, sure, this did take place a year after depression, but it was still a great time to be happy, just like part 1. While not as great as part 1, part 2 was still an incredible time to live through. It would also last much longer than part 1. It would last all the way to March 15th, 2020. It ended with the start of the coronavirus pandemic. Needless to say that this time period was the reason why 2019 was the best year of my life. So now back to school. This brings us to the final intensive for freshman year. Well, this is not really an intensive. It's really difficult to call it an intensive. The only thing we did in this intensive was an essay for English, so this is more of a sort of intensive. This essay for English was about a memory. We basically wrote about a certain moment or day we remember very well for being very good and describing it. I chose June 23rd, 2018. If you didn't watch last Storytime or Storytime 24, basically June 23rd was the last day of Fuge. I consider this to be one of the best days of my life because Fuge was pretty bad, and finally coming home felt such a relief. I also had to celebrate my birthday at Fuge, which sucked, so going back home to get all my presents played a big part. This essay is really the main reason I remember June 23rd so well, just because I wrote this essay as a freshman. So this was probably the best essay I wrote in freshman year. It simply boils down to the tone. Most of the things I wrote in freshman year were depressing and just dull. This essay was unique, as it was positive all the way through. According to my English teacher, this essay even made her, the reader, feel the same way I felt on this day. When you, the writer, manage to make the reader feel exactly how you want to feel, then you're doing something right. It's called manipulation. Having a manipulative tone is important in writing in order to influence the mood of the reader. In this essay, I successfully did that, and I think I do that quite a lot in Storytime as well as my other writings. Pretty obvious that I made 100. However, I actually don't remember what exactly it was due. I checked on the Google Doc, and it seems like I wrote this essay on March 24th, 2019. So it might have been due March 25th, since I had a habit of doing things the day before. Although it might have been due as late as early April, I don't know. I also want to mention task 2 for communications. So this task was an exam. It was a 50-question multiple choice test on the content we learned throughout the semester so far. I wrote 500 questions. It wasn't that long. It was 50. This is by far the only test we had in communications. Overall, it went very smoothly. I made a 94 on it. I didn't even have to study. Pretty easy test. So now, before I wrap up March, I want to discuss progress on the semester project for film. Now, one thing we were required to do for this semester project was do some research and include citations. However, our professor seemed to take this part pretty seriously. He made this its own assignment. This assignment had 2 parts. The first was where we had to go to the library and ask the librarian how to use the APA citations. There were a lot of problems with this though. First off, it was very difficult for me and everyone else to even go to the library because for us to go to the library, we had to have a parent, guardian, or teacher with us. You have to be 16 to walk around the campus alone, which is pretty bullshit rule in my opinion. The college advisor enforced this rule very strictly, so it was pretty much impossible to just break the rule. Then there is the fact that me and everyone else already knows how to cite sources. We know what APA is and we know how to find sources. I really hate it when professors don't think their students know how to do this stuff. Like, yeah, we learn how to cite in English. I don't mind professors including resources on how to do it. I think it's helpful, but making it an assignment, especially involving us having to ask someone about it, it's just overall pointless and really dumb. I mean, you're a college professor. You should expect your students to know how to cite. Ultimately, I just lied about my visit. Dylan told me the librarian he worked with and the information, and then I described the APA format in my own words. Then the second part was where we had to create our citations. Normal professors would be just like, include your citations in the APA format, and make sure to maybe include at least 3 sources or more. And also, sometimes they also might be like, maybe have one of those sources be a book, but I mean, that's basically how they'd be. That's how normal professors are. But our professor, of course, had us to do extra. He had us include 3 sources, but it couldn't just be 3. One had to be a book from the library. Like, it couldn't be like another book. It had to be directly from the college library. Another had to be from the library website's database, and the other could be a website or something. Why? What is the point of this? What are you gaining from it? I really don't understand. I get he might be trying to get us used to the database and library, but shit, man. This is a college class. I think you should expect us to know how to cite sources. But that's not all. We then had to write a 100-word summary of each source. This wasn't too big of a deal, but like, come on, man. I feel like that's too much for a paper. Most papers, including super serious papers, will just simply include citations. They don't describe the source. Overall, both of the parts of this assignment were pretty stupid. I mean, it did complete part of our semester project, as for some reason we had to include descriptions in our bibliography for our semester project, but still, makes absolutely no sense. Before I wrap up March, I'll discuss a few things we did for English. So since we were done with the Joy Luck Club, we did a multitude of short stories before moving on to our final big read of the year. I don't quite remember much of the stuff we read, but I do remember reading The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. I would talk about it in this story time had I not had a freshman moment and forget to read a play. Yeah, the night we were assigned to read this play, I forgot to read it. Although I don't think I forgot to read it, I probably just didn't want to because of the length. We had to read the whole thing in one night. I thought it was going to take forever. I recently looked over this play, and despite being like 44 pages, it really wasn't that long, mostly just because it was in play form. I was just lazy. However, I got stupid lucky here. Before English, I read over the SparkNotes summary of this play. I thought we were going to have a quiz on it. Fortunately, we didn't have a quiz. Instead, we did a group assignment. The rest of my group read, so I got really lucky. Apparently, the other classes had a quiz, so I was really lucky. Once we finished reading The Glass Menagerie, as well as the other short story readings, we began working on our final big read, Romeo and Juliet. At first, I thought this was going to be a very difficult read since I don't understand Shakespearean English. Fortunately, our teacher provided us with a modern translation, so I didn't have to deal with all those these and thous. As a result, this play was very easy to read. While it didn't flow as easily as Speak did, it still was a pretty easy read from the modern translation, so the class finished pretty quickly. So then that brings me to April. April 2019 was an awesome month. It was also a pretty eventful month as well regarding school. So to start, I want to mention that this would be SLC season. Our second SLC would be April 11th. So like back in November, we were working on our SLC binder to make sure everything was included. Not too much to talk about since this process of getting everything assignment went very smoothly. I easily found everything, and my teacher signed the binder off, meaning I passed seminar. Now, before I discuss the SLC, I want to talk a bit about English. So right now, my grade was at stake. In quarter 3, I made an 80, just barely a B. And at the time for quarter 4, I was staying at a 77. Yikes. I really needed to improve this grade. This would be really the moment where I decided that, yeah, I needed to start taking English as well as just school in general much more seriously. So that's one day in early April. I explained the situation to my English teacher and asked her what I can do to improve this grade. She was really impressed that I, out of all people, asked this question. So she told me about a project we were going to do for English. So this project was our project for Romeo and Juliet. It was a Knights at the Round Table discussion. This is where we gathered the desks into a circle and we all discussed 25 questions. All of the questions were subjective questions, so they didn't have an exact answer. To make 100, all you had to do was speak 4 times. By 4 times, I mean actual thought-provoking answers, not I agree or some shit like that. So you bet this is probably going to be the easiest project we do all year long. So how did it go? Well, it went great. How many times did I speak? Well, I didn't speak 4 times. I didn't speak 5, 6, or 7 times. I spoke 8 times. Yeah, I doubled the amount of times I was supposed to talk. The reason I talked a lot in this discussion was because I wanted to secure the 100, and I lost count of the times I spoke after every time I spoke. So I talked 8 times. In fact, my teacher had to pass a note around telling me to shut the hell up in order to let others talk. Needless to say that my teacher was really impressed with my performance. So then that brings me to April 11th, 2019. This is the day of my second SLC. Of course, Mom attended this SLC. Nothing too special during the actual process of me showing off my binder. But the reason this SLC is important is because on our way out, this is what I consider to be the most important part of my entire freshman year. Funnily enough, I had a freshman moment when I wrote Storytime 2 and completely forgot to talk about this event. Oh well, I'll talk about it here. So, as we were walking outside, my English teacher apprehends me and my mom. She then shakes my mom's hand and introduces herself. She then proceeded to brag on me and how well I did during the Knights at the Round Table discussion. Even though my English teacher respected me, I still did not respect her. But this would be the moment where I began respecting her a lot. When you compliment me to my face, that's one thing. But when you do it to someone else, especially mom or dad, then my respect for you is going to skyrocket. That's what happened here. After spending most of the school year fighting, we were now good with each other. This is one of the main reasons I consider my English teacher to be such an influential teacher. She brought me down, but she did it to make me even better and more dedicated. I needed this type of discipline to get ready for sophomore year, and I definitely need it for junior year. So I'm thankful for my English teacher for being tough on me and just making me a better student in general. So that's 2 out of 3 SLCs I did. The other I won't mention since it was sophomore intensive. So now throughout this, well, not sophomore intensive, sophomore SLC. I don't know why I wrote intensive. So now throughout this story time, I've talked a lot about freshman moments that I've had. How about we switch that focus to a freshman moment someone else had? So this freshman moment was had by my friend Edward. So Edward was, let's just say, a pretty crazy dude. He was kind of like me when it comes to schoolwork. He used to not do his schoolwork. He changed that in sophomore year, so a little bit after me. He was also just funny in general. Like one day, it was raining, so during lunch, Edward had the bright idea of standing outside and T-posing the entire time. Why? He was just trying to insert his dominance, and I think it worked. He did it for 30 minutes. I got into contact with him and asked why he did it. According to him, someone betted that he wouldn't do it, so of course being Edward, he actually did it. Gotta say, Edward's got some balls. Funnily enough, he would actually follow through with this in sophomore year. Sometime in February of 2020, he did this, but in snow. Yeah, Edward is going to go down as a legend at our school. So then of course came spring break. It lasted from April 15th to 19th. This would be the week I finally watched Titanic. The semester project was due on April 23rd, and I still had yet to have anything done for my semester project other than the citations. Yikes. But don't worry, I did the entire semester project in just one day. Yeah, I did it all on April 21st. It didn't take me very long to do it either. Only took me like 4 hours. I reread this paper and felt a lot shorter than I remember it being. The paper was only 3,500 words long on 11 pages. The average story time is well over twice the length of this paper. But overall, the paper was pretty well written. There were quite a lot of grammatical problems, but the paper had a very professional and descriptive tone, which was needed for the paper. I also, of course, included the bibliography I did back in March, and that was that. Our professor hyped this project to be something that would take us the whole semester, and then there's me who did it in a few hours. Now, what grade did I make on it? Well, I made an 83 on it. This actually broke the record for the highest grade I ever received on a film review, so I was pretty happy with this grade. Speaking of film reviews, how about we talk about task 3 for communications? As you could probably guess from that transition, this task was a film review. That's perfect since I had some experience with film reviews from film. However, this would be a little bit different. So the way this task works is that we watched a movie called Homeless to Harvard. Our task was to write a paper analyzing interpersonal communications or something else I can't remember. I wasn't able to find an archive of this task, but from what I remember, I made 100, so not too much to say about it. Then there's Algebra. So sometime in late April, we went over to the college's main campus. Since we were finishing our final high school math course, we were obviously going to be taking college math in 10th grade. But before we could do this, we had to take a placement test. It determined if we were ready to take pre-calc or not. Every single student, including me, was ready to take pre-calc. We'd take it in the spring of 2020 semester, as our school had us take another college math course in the fall, which was basically a review of Algebra 2. But still a nice way that we all passed. Finally, to wrap up April, I want to talk about business. 2 projects for business in particular, actually. The first one I want to mention is the second part of the budgeting interview. I'm not too sure exactly how it worked, though, as like task 3, I couldn't find it in an archive. But from what I remember, we basically looked through our room and tried to determine the cost and stuff. Then we tried to create a budget like we were buying this stuff. Then we basically answered some reflection questions. Pretty easy project. Now, the other project for business was a much more long-term project. We were supposed to have worked on it since February, but of course being me, I waited until April 25th to do it. But to be honest, it didn't really require much time. What it was is that in February, our professor introduced us to his one website called Wall Street Survivor. This is where we basically played around with the stocks and helped us understand how the stock market worked. Then after playing it for a while, we had to write a 1-page paper about our experience with it, as well as answer a few reflection questions. I didn't play too much with it, but I did get a good understanding of how the game worked so that I was able to write the paper, and I knew what I was talking about. And it worked. Our professor said my paper was great and I made 100 on it. And then that brings us to May. Finally, the last month of the school year. May 2019 was really good, just like April. However, it was a lot more eventful, so I'll definitely be spending a lot of time in May, but don't worry, it's not going to be like my junior year story time where May was like half the entire story time. It won't be that long. So, to start, let's discuss May 3rd. This is a very eventful day. So to start, let's discuss one last project for business. So this was a marketing project. This is where we had to come up with a product and advertise it. And oh god, every single group had a freshman moment presenting theirs, including ours. My group came up with a device that when you plug it into your Chromebook or phone, it would give you internet. Kind of like an Ethernet cable, but it would be more of a stick. Oh god, our presentation though was pretty funny. Our professor joked a lot about the product and stuff during the presentation, and some stuff was just over the top of his head. Everyone else's group seemed to be the same way, but yet our professor still laughed so hard that day. He gave my group a 95, so that's good at least. Now after college, this would be when the day got really weird. So our school normally every year does an Earth Day, where we get the whole school to work outside, whether it be raking leaves, working in the garden, picking up trash, you name it. This is the last time our school did an Earth Day, as in sophomore and junior year coronavirus came in and messed everything up. We do this because part of the expeditionary learning curriculum deals with the natural world, and I think this day definitely helps exemplify that concept. So this year, the school did something a little different. Half of the school went off to a mountain and hiked, while the rest did normal Earth Day. I don't like hiking, so I stayed at the school and did a normal Earth Day. So the way Earth Day worked was that we were split into 3 groups. We went to 3 different stations. So my group was with my sophomore seminar teacher, the one that got arrested. I believe I was the only freshman in this group. However, Hunter was also in this group, so I at least had a friend in his group, or in this group. Our first station was raking leaves. So our school lies right beside a creek covered by a bunch of pine trees. By the creek, there is what we call the outdoor classroom. It's a circular picnic table. There's also a garden beside it too. There were a lot of leaves around the outdoor classroom, so we had plenty of leaves to rake. So we did that for about an hour. It went pretty well. Me and Hunter didn't rake too much leaves, we mostly messed around a lot, but our group still made considerable progress. Then we went over to the garden station. This is on the other side of the school. So our school had a pretty large garden. They grew a multitude of crops, so our job was to pull weeds. This went pretty well, but the weeds were huge. In fact, there was one weed in particular that was so big it took both me and my sophomore seminar teacher to pull it out off the ground. Yeah, that's a big ass weed. In fact, so big we had to use shovels for this weed. Yeah, that's how large these weeds were. Then after we pulled the weeds, we had our final station. This is the station I remember the best. So it included 2 activities. The first activity was where we went to the side of the road and picked up trash. 2 groups were at the station prior to us, so there really wasn't much trash to pick up. The second activity we did involved us going to the biology room. Here we were going to paint rocks. We were given a certain plant we had to paint on the rock. My assigned plant was the pepper. This was a pretty funny painting. Because I suck at painting, as well as art in general, I just painted the chili logo. Before that, I painted the entire rock black, and then I painted the chili pepper once the paint was dried. It's still in the biology lab today, and I often go there just to see my rock. Mine is of course the most distinguishable out of all the other rocks due to the fact that I colored the rock black, so it's pretty easy for me as well as others to spot. So then that's all that happened that day. Surprisingly, it was fun. I hate doing yard work, but I mean, at least it was with my school, so it made it more enjoyable. And we painted a rock. That was fun too. So let's jump to Wednesday, May 8th. So this would be the day we took our English final exam. The school year ends May 21st, by the way. That's why we're taking finals so early. So this final exam was pretty easy overall. I made a 94 on it, so nothing too much to talk about the exam itself. But after the exam is what's really interesting. So the final exam was created by the state. All of our end-of-year tests were created by the state. This meant that our teachers were required to read off a script provided by the state. But this was an interesting case. When we finished the exam, our teacher said, "Congratulations, you have completed the North Carolina English 1 final exam. Please remain seated." Normally you stay quiet after they read this, but this is freshman English we're talking about. We do things differently here. So we all started clapping. Our English teacher joined us and clapped with us. Our other teachers also clapped as well. Definitely great to have that class out of the way. So now there are 2 more finals I had. Of course, all classes had their end of year assignments, but only 2 were considered as finals. This final in particular is the only college final I had that semester, and it was for business. This final was just like our midterm. It was 10 essay-based questions. We could choose between 5. Only difference is that we could not get extra credit for a 6th question. So the maximum points you could get was only 100. This test was also not cumulative. It was based on all the content we discussed after the midterm. So overall, this is a really easy final. I made a 94 on it. So that's 1 college class that's been wrapped up. How about we discuss wrapping up the other 3 college classes before I discuss wrapping up algebra? So firstly, let's discuss task 4 for communications. So this is a speech. Basically, simply give a tribute speech or a special occasion speech in front of the entire class. My speech involved me pretending to be a rapper who just won a Grammy, and I gotta say, this task went really horribly. So, the reason this task was so horrible is because I put a lot of humor in a speech when humor should have been completely omitted. In this speech, I basically talked about depression and how I overcame it. Basically, if Storytime 28 was made by a 14-year-old in front of all my classmates. However, I should have been a lot more serious in the speech. I cracked plenty of jokes. My rap name was literally Bees, and my first line was, according to all known laws of aviation, a bee should not be able to fly. Those things do not go together. The worst part is I didn't even end with, I had virtually no rehearsal for that. I also stuttered a lot, and I even called someone a bitch in that speech. Yeah, not my greatest moment, but the funny thing is that my professor really liked the speech. She gave me a 96. Yeah, how the hell did that happen? I have no idea. Oh well, nobody other than me remembers this, although my school is going to remember now since I just mentioned it and they watch Storytime, so. So now communications is finished up, how about we talk about a course I have barely mentioned throughout the Storytime, health. So the reason I want to mention health is because of a situation that happened. So one night, some dumbass broke into the college and stole a bunch of people's quiz sheets. These had every grade we made on each quiz since January. I was one of the students whose quiz sheet was stolen. In fact, I believe half the entire class's quiz sheet was stolen. Pretty funny situation, but also pretty stupid. Like, my main question is, why the hell would you steal people's assignments? Like, what are you gaining from that? Oh well, due to this situation, our professor gave us all 100 for the course, so I really didn't have to try on the quizzes, although I would have made an A regardless. So now the final college course I have to wrap up is film. So there are 2 assignments I want to describe before I'm done discussing film. So the first assignment I want to mention is the final film review we did for this class. This semester project was only second to last. This was our final. So for this film review, we were basically assigned a film we probably should have at least heard about. I was assigned Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which is perfect because I read that book and saw the movie in 5th grade. I didn't rewatch it since I was lazy, but nonetheless, I still managed to do even better than I did on the semester project. I made 100. Yeah, I finally made the quote-unquote perfect film review. Took about 4 months, but I managed to do. The final assignment now for the final assignment. For this assignment, we were required to basically reflect on film criticism and describe how it could be used in other situations. I chose to describe how film criticism could be similar in doing criticism for video games, since I had experience. Now, in Storytime 2, I stated that the game that I used to compare the two things was Pokemon Black and White. Turns out, I found an archive of my writing entry for this assignment, and it seemed like I actually used Pokemon Platinum, mainly because that's my favorite Pokemon game. I think I conveyed the point pretty well nonetheless. I described how, like in film criticism, you could do it with video games by analyzing the plot, the lighting, the cinematography, and the cutscenes, and other stuff. I do think I should have used Pokemon Black and White though, as that game has the best story of any video game I've ever played. My god, that story is incredible. Although, I only used Pokemon Platinum to describe the story, I didn't use my favorite video game of all time, Super Mario Galaxy, to describe cinematography and music. Overall, I think I conveyed the point very well, and I had a very strong argument, and my professor agreed. He gave me 100 for it, so a good way to wrap up the course. So yeah, college is completely finished, and so is English. The only class I still had to worry about is Algebra. So in the past, Algebra 2 only had a final exam. However, this year, the state decided that they need to have Algebra 2 be an EOC course. So basically, an EOC, or in-the-course test, is a test that is much more serious and harder than a final exam. For example, the geometry final only had about 40 questions in 2 hours. However, EOCs give you 3 hours to take a 75-question test, but you are allowed extra time if needed. Another thing too is that EOCs generally have about 10 to 15 field questions. Field questions are questions that won't count towards your final grade, but are included in order to help the state determine what questions should be on the future test. It also helps the state calculate statistics and conduct studies. Now, this EOC was a little bit funky with field questions, because this is the first time the state ever did an EOC for Algebra 2. Every single question on this test was a field question. This meant that no, this test did not count towards our final grade. The state just needed some students to do studies on. We weren't told that this was not going to count towards our final grade before taking the test, which of course our teacher wasn't allowed to because it would have skewed the results. Some students were pretty pissed off when we found out. I was pretty happy though. I mean, I did well on this EOC, but I was just glad I didn't have to worry about it, and I was just worried how it would skew my grade. We took this test on May 17th. And then the next week ended on Tuesday. Monday had nothing going for us, so let's talk about Tuesday. So Tuesday, May 21st, 2019, the last day of freshman year. Pretty exciting day. So to start, my grandmother took me to school like she always does. The only thing is that she actually stayed at school. I walked her in and walked her to the multi-purpose room, where our school was holding the end of year award ceremony. Once she got her seat, I went to English and then my first block, which was my first block. So in English, me and some friends were gathered around and played a game called, played some Geometry Dash. I've already introduced Geometry Dash, I think. So we were playing a level called the Nightmare. This is a demon level, which are considered to be the hardest levels in the game. The Nightmare is often considered to be the easiest demon in the game. Nobody at my school had ever beaten an easy demon yet. I had good progress on the Nightmare. I had 57% on it during this time, but we all just joked around and played it. I would actually become the first and so far only person at school to beat the Nightmare, but that wouldn't be until that December. But nonetheless, we all were having fun. And then it was time for the award ceremony. I didn't win any awards but a couple of my friends did, but I didn't. But probably the most notable part of this ceremony was when it came time for one of the teachers to read a book called Big Plans. In this book, a kid basically goes on about his big plans. He even gets the president involved and goes to the moon just to shout that he's got big plans I say. The teacher that was responsible for reading this book in front of the whole school was my sophomore seminar teacher, my leader for Earth Day. So everything went normally at first, but then he had a freshman moment. On one page, the narrator gives instructions to different characters. In one line, he says, "Listen here, bird." However, our teacher just completely screwed this line up. In front of parents, students, teachers, the principal, and I think even the superintendent. He said, "Listen here, big shit." He then immediately said, bird, but it was too late. Everyone starts laughing. Our principal, who normally doesn't laugh, started laughing too. My grandmother was a bit excessive with her laugh. Our teacher then made that face that you could tell just said, "I just goofed up." Ultimately, he'd finished the book and we'd cheer him on. Afterwards, it was time to go home. My grandmother, of course, drove me home. But before we could go home, we had to stop by the high school, and I would have gone to had I not gone to early college, the traditional school. The reason we had to go here was for me to turn in the paperwork for me to do driver's ed. While my school does offer driver's ed, it's not offered until the beginning of the school year, and I was turning 15 in 1 month, so we wanted to go ahead and get my permit that summer. So yeah, that's the last day of school, but there is still one last day I want to mention before I close out with story time. This would be Saturday, May 25th. So the reason I bring this day up is because that night, my parents decided to reward me for my hard work throughout freshman year. That reward was a Switch. They also bought Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with it. So I stayed up until around 3 o'clock playing Mario Kart 8 Deluxe that night. I actually was not expecting to receive a Switch, since normally they would only reward me for all A's. But this year was different. I was taking college classes as a 14-year-old. I worked hard, and that's as good as making all A's as a traditional school. So the hard work definitely paid off. So yeah, that was my freshman year. I went from a pretty clueless and kind of cocky student to a hardworking student who has his priorities in check. Pretty crazy that's how much I grew throughout freshman year. This and 8th grade were the school years I definitely changed the most, from the beginning to the end. It's always fun to look back and see how much I've changed too. So that's all I got for today's story time. Next week, on August 13th, 2021, I'll be discussing my experience at Winter Retreat 2018. Anyways, that's all I got, and I'll see you guys later. Bye! Wow, I finally finished that. Wow. That took a long time to do. That did break the record for the new longest story time that I've ever written. Approximately 27,000 words, and I think we spent about 2 hours, 4 minutes on that. So, new record. So,